In the park, I found my son sitting on a bench with my grandson and their luggage. I asked him, "Why aren't you at work?" He said, "I got fired. My father-in-law said our bloodline wasn't worthy." I smiled and said, "Get in the car." It was time he found out who the real boss was. I am Isaiah Jefferson, 75 years old, and I have learned that silence is the loudest weapon a man can carry. I live in the south side of Chicago in a neighborhood most people drive through with their doors locked. My neighbors see an old man in a flannel shirt driving a rusted Ford F-150. My son sees a father who barely scraped by. But what none of them see is the ledger in my head. They do not see the deeds to the warehouses on the industrial corridor or the controlling shares in the logistics firms that move half the freight in the Midwest. I keep my head down. I keep my mouth shut. And I watch. But last Tuesday, watching was no longer an option. The Chicago winter does not care about your problems. It cuts right through the bone. The wind coming off Lake Michigan was brutal, the kind that freezes your tears before they can hit your cheek. I was taking my usual morning walk near Lincoln Park, a place where the wealthy walk their purebred dogs, when I saw something that stopped my heart. There on a freezing metal bench sat my son Marcus. He was huddled over his expensive wool coat, looking out of place against the despair in his posture. Next to him was my grandson Leo, only 7 years old, wrapped in a blanket that was too thin for this weather. Beside them were 2 suitcases. One was standing upright. The other was lying on its side. A wheel snapped off its contents, spilling onto the dirty snow. I walked over my boots, crunching on the ice. Marcus did not look up. He was staring at his hands, his knuckles white. "Marcus," I said. My voice was calm, but inside a fire was starting to burn. He flinched. He looked up at me, and I saw a man who had been broken. His eyes were red-rimmed with exhaustion and shame. "Dad," he whispered. "What are you doing here, son? It is 10 in the morning on a Tuesday. You should be at the Sterling plant. Leo should be in school." Marcus tried to speak, but his voice cracked. He looked at Leo, who was shivering against him. I sat down on the bench. The metal was like ice against my legs. I put my hand on my son's shoulder. "Talk to me, Marcus." He took a breath that rattled in his chest. "Preston fired me, Dad. He fired me this morning. Preston Sterling." The name tasted like bile. He was the owner of Sterling Manufacturing, a man who smiled with too many teeth and shook your hand while looking over your shoulder for someone more important. He was also Marcus's father-in-law. "Fired you?" I asked. "For what cause? You have been the operations manager there for 5 years. You doubled their efficiency." "It wasn't about efficiency," Marcus said. And then he said the words that made the fire in my chest turn into an inferno. We were at breakfast. Victoria and Leo were there. Preston walked in and threw my suitcase down the stairs. He told me to get out. He said he was restructuring the company and the family. He said he needed an heir who looked like a Sterling. He looked right at Leo and then at me and said our bloodline wasn't worthy of his legacy. I looked at my grandson. Leo had my eyes. He had my chin. He was a Jefferson. And to a man like Preston Sterling, that meant he was a stain. "And Victoria," I asked, "what did your wife do?" Marcus looked down at the snow. She cried. She begged him to stop yelling. But when he told me to leave, she didn't move. She stayed in her chair, Dad. She let him kick us out into the cold. I nodded slowly. I was not surprised. Victoria Sterling had always been a bird in a gilded cage, too afraid of her father to fly. But to let her own child be thrown onto the street, that was a sin I could not forgive. Marcus wiped his face. "He froze my bank accounts, Dad. He has friends at the bank. He flagged them for suspicious activity. I can't even buy Leo a hot chocolate. I have nothing. I am 35 years old and I am homeless." He buried his face in his hands. I looked at the skyline of Chicago, the tall glass buildings reflecting the cold sun. Preston Sterling thought he had won. He thought he had discarded a piece of trash. He thought power was about shouting and throwing weight around. He had no idea he had just declared war on the wrong man. I stood up. My knees popped, but I stood tall. "Pick up that suitcase, Marcus." "Dad." "I can't go to your place," Marcus said, his voice full of misery. "It is too small. You barely have heat. I can't put Leo through that. We will go to a shelter. I will figure this out." I looked at him. My son, who had tried so hard to escape my shadow, to assimilate into their world, to be what they wanted. He still thought I was a poor retiree living on a fixed income. He thought the peeling paint on my bungalow was a sign of poverty, not a camouflage I had perfected over 40 years. "Get in the truck, Marcus," I commanded. My voice left no room for argument. He looked at me, surprised by the tone. He stood up, his legs stiff from the cold. He picked up the broken suitcase, trying to hold the clothes inside. I picked up Leo. My grandson wrapped his little arms around my neck. He smelled like cold air and fear. "It is going to be okay, Leo," I whispered to him. "Grandpa is here." We walked to my truck. It was a 2002 Ford. The bumper held on with wire, the bed scratched and dented. I saw Marcus look at it with a mix of gratitude and hopelessness. He thought this was rock bottom. He thought he was retreating to the slums. I started the engine. It roared to life with a cough and a sputter. I turned the heat up high. Marcus sat in the passenger seat, staring out the window as we drove south. We passed the luxury condos, the high-end boutiques, the world he had just been exiled from. As we crossed into the south side, the scenery changed. The buildings became lower, the streets rougher. I saw Marcus tense up. He looked at the boarded-up windows of a shop we passed. "I am sorry, Dad," he said softly. "I promised myself I would never bring my son back here. I wanted better for him." "You think this is worse than a mansion where he is treated like a mongrel?" I asked. "No, but look at this place, Dad. It is dying." I looked out the window. I did not see death. I saw opportunity. I saw the warehouse on the corner that I had bought for $10,000 in 1982, which was now leasing to a tech distribution firm for $20,000 a month. I saw the apartment complex on the next block fully renovated inside, which I owned through a shell company. I saw the assets that made me a silent king in a kingdom everyone else had abandoned. "Preston Sterling thinks he owns the world because his name is on a building," I said to Marcus. "But ownership isn't about signs, it is about control." Marcus didn't understand. He was too busy worrying about how he was going to feed Leo. We pulled up to my house. It was a modest brick bungalow, indistinguishable from the others on the block. The fence was chain link. The yard was mostly dormant winter grass. Marcus helped Leo out of the truck. They stood on the sidewalk looking like refugees in their designer clothes. I unlocked the front door and ushered them inside. The house was warm. I kept the thermostat at 72 degrees, a luxury I never denied myself. The furniture was old, yes. The sofa was covered in a plastic protector from the 90s. The television was small, but it was clean, it was paid for, and it was safe. "Put the bags in the back room," I told Marcus. "There is soup on the stove." Marcus sat Leo down at the kitchen table. I watched my son move through the house he had grown up in. He looked small again, defeated. "Dad, I need to use your phone," Marcus said. "I need to call lawyers. I need to find a way to get my job back. Maybe if I apologize to Preston." "Apologize?" I slammed my hand on the table. The sound made Leo jump. "You will do no such thing. You do not apologize to a man who insults your blood. You do not beg a man who throws your child into the snow." "But I have to survive." "Dad," Marcus yelled back, the stress finally breaking him. "You don't understand how powerful he is. He knows everyone in this city. He will blacklist me. I won't be able to get a job anywhere in manufacturing. He has judges in his pocket. He has the banks. What do you have? A Social Security check and a house that is falling apart." I looked at my son. The pain in his eyes was real. He was terrified. He believed the narrative that had been fed to him his whole life, that the Sterlings were gods and we were nothing. "Sit down, Marcus," I said quietly. He sank into the chair, putting his head in his hands. "I am sorry, Dad. I didn't mean that. I am scared." I went to the pantry. I moved aside a stack of canned beans and reached for a loose floorboard in the back corner. I pried it open with a butter knife. Beneath it was a rusted metal box. I brought the box to the table. It was heavy. Marcus looked up. "What is that?" "This is the truth," I said. I opened the lid. Inside was not cash. I did not keep cash in the house. That was for amateurs. Inside were documents, deeds, stock certificates, and a corporate seal for a company called Jefferson Holdings. Marcus looked at the papers. He picked up the one on top. It was a property deed for a commercial logistics center near O'Hare Airport. "What is this?" he asked, frowning. Read the name on the owner line, I said. He squinted. Jefferson Holdings, LLC. I pulled out another document, a bank statement from a private wealth management firm. The balance was 8 figures. Marcus looked at me, his mouth open. Dad, whose is this? It is ours, son. I don't understand. You worked at the auto plant for 40 years. You retired with a pension. I worked at the plant, yes, I said, sitting down opposite him. But I listened. I watched. When the white folks fled the neighborhood in the 70s, they sold their properties for pennies. I bought them. When the factories closed and everyone panicked, I bought the land. I didn't buy fancy cars, Marcus. I didn't buy suits. I bought dirt. And dirt never loses its value if you hold it long enough. Marcus was flipping through the papers, his hands trembling. Dad, this says you own the building that Sterling Manufacturing leases their overflow warehouse from. I leaned back in my chair. I do. You are his landlord. Technically, Jefferson Holdings is his landlord. Preston is too arrogant to check who actually owns the holding company. He just pays the rent. And lately, Marcus, he has been late on that rent. Marcus looked at me as if he was seeing a stranger he had lived with his entire life. Why didn't you tell me I have been struggling to pay my mortgage? I have been taking abuse from Preston for years because I thought we needed his money. Why did you let me live like a pauper when we had this? Because I said, my voice hardening. If I had given you this money when you were 20, you would have become just like them. Soft, entitled. You would have thought worth was something you bought, not something you built. I needed you to become a man, Marcus. I needed you to learn how to work, how to sweat, how to take a hit and keep standing. I looked at the broken suitcase by the door. But today you took a hit you couldn't handle. Today the lesson is over. Marcus looked at the papers, then at me, then at Leo, who was quietly eating a cracker. A change came over his face. The fear was receding, replaced by a dawning realization of power. So what do we do? Marcus asked. I smiled. It was not a nice smile. It was the smile of a wolf who has cornered a rabbit. Preston Sterling said our bloodline wasn't worthy, I said. He thinks he can erase us. He thinks he can starve us out. But he has made a fatal error. He is playing a game of money, but he is leveraged to the hilt. He is trying to float an IPO to save his company from debt. How do you know that? Marcus asked. I know because I own the debt, son. I bought his commercial loans from the bank 3 months ago through a shell corporation. Marcus dropped the paper. You own his debt. I own his warehouse. I own his loans. And as of this morning, when he missed his covenant payment, I technically own the right to foreclose on his entire operation. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the street that everyone else despised. Get cleaned up, Marcus. Put on a suit. We are not staying here tonight. Where are we going? We are going to pay a visit to your lawyer. Then we are going to start the process of calling in Mr. Sterling's loans. He kicked you out of his house. Fine. By the end of this week, I will own that house. Marcus stood up. He looked at the rusted box, then at me. He didn't look like a victim anymore. He looked like a Jefferson. Yes, sir, he said. I picked up the phone. It was time to make the first call. It was time to show Preston Sterling that while he was playing checkers, I had been playing chess for 40 years, and checkmate was coming. We had barely stepped through the threshold of my bungalow when the silence of the house was shattered by the shrill ring of Marcus's cell phone. The sound was like a siren in the quiet of the hallway, a reminder that the world outside was not done with us yet. Marcus froze, his hand hovering over his pocket. I saw the fear in his eyes, the same fear I had seen in the eyes of men facing a foreman who held their livelihood in a clenched fist. He pulled the phone out. The screen lit up with a number he did not save, but I could tell by the way his shoulders slumped that he knew exactly who it was. Answer it, I said. My voice was low, steady, an anchor in the storm that was brewing in his mind. He swiped the screen and put it to his ear. His hand was trembling. Hello, he whispered. I watched him. I watched the color drain from his face until he looked like a ghost standing in my entryway. He didn't speak. He just listened, his eyes widening, his breath catching in his throat. He looked at Leo, who was sitting on the floor playing with a plastic truck I had kept in the closet for 20 years. Marcus turned away, shielding his son from the devastation on his face, when he choked out, "No, you can't do that. She wouldn't do that." He listened for another moment, then the phone slipped from his fingers and clattered onto the hardwood floor. He didn't move to pick it up. He just stood there swaying as if the air had been sucked out of the room. "What did they say, Marcus?" I asked, though I already suspected the answer. It was Preston's lawyer. Marcus said, his voice hollow, empty of everything but shock. He said he has already filed for divorce on Victoria's behalf. He said he filed an emergency motion for full custody of Leo. I looked at the phone on the floor. It was still connected, a faint tinny voice coming from the speaker. I bent down my knees, cracking, and picked it up. I put it to my ear. "Mr. Jefferson, are you there?" the voice on the other line said. It was smooth, polished, the kind of voice that costs $500 an hour. "This is Mr. Sterling's legal counsel. We need to arrange for the transfer of the minor immediately." I didn't say a word. I just breathed. "Mr. Jefferson," the lawyer continued, his tone shifting from professional to threatening. "You need to understand the gravity of your situation. You are currently unemployed. You have no fixed address. You are residing in a substandard dwelling in a high-crime area. The court will not look favorably on a father who drags his child into poverty. We are arguing that you are unfit due to lack of financial means. If you do not surrender the child by tomorrow morning, we will send law enforcement to retrieve him." I ended the call. I didn't slam the phone down. I didn't yell. I just pressed the red button and severed the connection. Marcus collapsed onto the old floral sofa. "They're going to take him, Dad. They're going to take Leo. He said I am homeless. He said I am indigent." He looked around my living room. He saw the peeling wallpaper in the corner. He saw the drafty windows covered with plastic to keep out the Chicago wind. He saw poverty because that is what I had taught him to see. He didn't know that the peeling wallpaper hid insulation I had installed myself, or that the drafty windows were scheduled to be replaced next week by a contractor who paid me rent on 3 other properties. He saw what Preston saw. Failure. "They aren't taking anyone," I said. "But you don't understand," Marcus cried, tears finally spilling over. "It's the law. They have the money. They have the power." Preston said my bloodline wasn't worthy. He meant this. He meant that we are nothing. Before I could answer, the phone rang again. Marcus stared at it. It wasn't the lawyer this time. The picture on the screen was Victoria. "Pick it up, Marcus," I commanded. He hesitated, then grabbed the phone like a lifeline. "Victoria, Vicky, please tell me you didn't do this." I watched him. I watched the hope flare in his eyes and then die, replaced by a deep, aching confusion. "I know he forced you," Marcus said, his voice pleading. "I know he is controlling everything, but you are his mother, Vicky. You can stop this. Just tell the lawyers to stop." He listened, nodding desperately. "Then come here. Just leave the house. Get in your car and come here. We are at Dad's house. We can figure this out together. You, me, and Leo. We can fight him if we are together." I stepped closer. I needed to hear this. I needed to hear the moment the cord was cut. I saw Marcus's face crumble. He pulled the phone away from his ear slightly, and in the quiet room I could hear her voice. It was high-pitched, frantic, and laced with the same poison that ran through her father's veins. "Marcus, I can't," she sobbed. "I can't go there." "Why not?" Marcus asked. "We are safe here. My dad is here." "Marcus, look at where you are," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper as if she was afraid someone would hear her talking to the help. "It's the South Side. It's the hood, Marcus. I can't bring my car there. I can't live like that. It isn't safe." "My dad says you put Leo in danger just by taking him to that zip code. Please just bring Leo back. We can work out visitation later when you get back on your feet. But I can't come there." I felt a cold rage settle in my stomach. It wasn't the anger of a man who had been insulted. It was the judgment of a king who had heard a peasant speak out of turn. She wasn't worried about safety. She was worried about status. She was worried about the zip code. She was worried that her Tesla would look out of place parked next to my rusted Ford. She was choosing the velvet handcuffs of her father over the freedom of her husband. I reached out and took the phone from Marcus's hand. He didn't resist. He was too stunned, too broken by the revelation that his wife saw him not as a partner, but as a charity case that had gone bad. I put the phone to my ear. I listened to her breathing. "Victoria," I said. There was a silence. "Who is this?" she asked, her voice trembling. "This is the man whose bloodline isn't worthy," I said. My voice was gravel deep and resonant. "Isaiah?" she asked. "Put Marcus back on." "No," I said. "You are done talking to him. You have said enough. You think this house isn't good enough for you? You think this zip code is beneath you? Let me tell you something, little girl. The only thing dangerous in this house is the truth, and you are terrified of it. Isaiah." "Please," she cried. My dad is making me. Your dad isn't holding a gun to your head, I interrupted. He is holding a checkbook, and you have made your choice. You chose the checkbook. But let me be clear, you are making a mistake. You are betting on a horse that has already broken its leg. What are you talking about? She asked, her voice shrill. I am talking about loyalty, I said, and yours is cheap. So listen to me closely because I am only going to say this once. You have a choice to make right now in the next 10 seconds. You can get in your car, drive down here, and stand by the man you swore an oath to, or you can stay in that mansion and become exactly what your father is. She didn't speak. I could hear the hesitation. I could hear the fear, but mostly I could hear the calculation. She was weighing the comfort of her father's money against the uncertainty of a life with Marcus. I can't, she whispered. It's too risky. I laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound. Risky. You have no idea what risk is. You chose your father. Remember that. When the walls come down, remember you chose to stay inside. I hung up the phone. I handed it back to Marcus. He was staring at me, tears streaming down his face. He looked like he had been punched in the gut. She isn't coming, is she? He asked softly. No, son, I said. She isn't. He looked at Leo, who was happily driving the plastic truck over the uneven floorboards. She gave up on us, because of where we live, because we don't have money. I walked over to the kitchen window. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the small backyard. The ground was frozen hard, dusted with snow. It looked bleak. It looked like the end of the line. But I knew better. She didn't give up on you because you don't have money, Marcus, I said, turning back to him. She gave up on you because she thinks you are weak. She thinks you are powerless, and right now, you believe her. I walked to the back door. Put your coat on, I said. Where are we going? Marcus asked, wiping his eyes. Not we, I said. Just me. You stay here. Watch Leo. Don't answer the phone. Don't open the door for anyone but me. I grabbed a shovel from the utility closet on the porch. I stepped out into the biting cold. The wind hit me instantly, but I welcomed it. It sharpened my mind. I walked to the center of the small yard near the old oak tree that I had planted the day I bought this house 40 years ago. The ground was like iron. I had to stomp on the shovel to break through the frost. I dug. I wasn't digging a grave. I was digging up a resurrection. My breath came in white clouds. My shoulders ached. But I kept digging. I dug past the frost line into the dark, rich earth below. 3 feet down, my shovel hit something hard, a metallic clang that rang out in the cold air. I knelt in the dirt. I brushed away the soil with my gloved hands. There it was. An old steel ammunition box, rusted orange on the outside, sealed tight against the elements. It looked like trash. It looked like something a crazy old man would bury because he didn't trust banks. And that is exactly what I wanted people to think. I pulled the box out of the hole. It was heavy. I wiped the dirt off the lid. I stood up, holding the box against my chest. I looked back at the house. I could see Marcus through the window, sitting at the table, his head in his hands. He was mourning the life he thought he had lost. He was mourning the wife who had looked at our neighborhood and seen only danger, not recognizing the strength that grew in this soil. Preston Sterling and his lawyer thought they were dealing with a destitute man. They thought they could bully us with legal filings and financial shaming. They thought the game was over because they had cleared the board. I walked back into the house, tracking mud and snow onto the floor. I placed the rusted box on the kitchen table with a heavy thud. Marcus jumped. He looked at the box, then at me. "What is that?" he asked. Is that money?" He thought it was cash. He thought I was like those old folks who stuffed mattresses because they feared the system. He was thinking small. "No, Marcus," I said, peeling off my gloves. "Money burns. Money gets spent. This is leverage." I popped the latch. It groaned, stiff with age and rust. I threw the lid back. Inside, nestled in oilcloth to keep it dry, was not a stack of bills. It was a heavy embossing seal, the kind used to certify corporate documents. The black paint on the handle was chipped, but the die itself was pristine silver steel. I took it out. I placed a napkin on the table and pressed the seal down hard. It left a crisp, raised impression in the paper. Jefferson Holdings, LLC, SD, 1980. Marcus looked at it, confused. "What is this?" "This," I said, my voice hard as flint, "is the stamp that authorizes the lease on the land your father-in-law's factory sits on. This is the stamp that holds the liens on his equipment." And this is the stamp that is going to remind Mr. Sterling that you don't judge a book by its cover, and you certainly don't judge a landlord by his zip code. I looked my son in the eye. He wants a war. He wants to talk about unworthy blood. Fine. We are going to show him what our blood is worth. Grab your coat, Marcus. We have a meeting to interrupt. The drive north was a journey between two different worlds. We left the cracked pavement and the narrow brick bungalows of my neighborhood and merged onto the highway heading toward the Gold Coast and beyond to where the air smelled different and the money was old. The heater in my truck rattled a constant hum that filled the silence between my son and me. Marcus sat in the passenger seat, staring out the window, his jaw tight. He was a man going back to the scene of his execution, and I could feel the shame radiating off him like heat. I did not turn on the radio. I wanted him to think. I wanted him to look at the mansions we were passing with their high fences and manicured hedges and really see them. Not as castles to be envied, but as fortresses built by men who were afraid of what lay outside. Preston Sterling lived in one of those fortresses, a sprawling estate in Lake Forest that looked more like a museum than a home. It was a place designed to make you feel small before you even stepped out of your car. We pulled up to the main gate. It was 12 feet of wrought iron, black and imposing, topped with gold spikes that glinted in the winter sun. I stopped the truck. The engine idled with a rough, rhythmic chug that sounded like a tractor in a library. Marcus reached for the door handle, but I stopped him. "Stay inside," I said. "Let him come to us." I rolled down my window and pressed the button on the intercom. A camera buzzed, focusing its lens on my face. "State your business," a voice crackled. It wasn't Preston. It was likely house staff trained to filter out the unwanted. "We are here for Leo's things," I said. My voice was gravel and stone. "Tell Mr. Sterling we are not leaving until we get them." There was a long silence. Then the static cut out. The gate did not open. Minutes passed. Marcus shifted in his seat. "He isn't going to let us in, Dad. He is going to call the police. He is going to say we are trespassing." "Let him call," I said, resting my hands on the steering wheel. "I have the title to the land he is standing on in a safe deposit box. Let the police come. It will make the eviction more interesting." Finally, the front door of the mansion opened. Preston Sterling stepped out. He was not alone. He was flanked by two private security guards, big men in tight blazers. But Preston, he looked like the master of the universe. He was wearing a cashmere coat that probably cost more than my truck, a silk scarf, and Italian leather shoes that had never touched dirt. He did not walk toward us. He stood at the top of his driveway waiting. He expected us to get out to walk to the gate to beg through the bars. I put the truck in gear and inched forward until my bumper was almost touching the iron. Then I killed the engine. "Get out, Marcus," I said. We stepped out into the cold. The wind was biting, but Preston didn't seem to feel it. He walked slowly down the long driveway, his hands in his pockets, a smirk playing on his lips. He stopped 10 feet from the gate, keeping the iron bars between us. It was a zoo, and he was the visitor looking at the animals. "Well," Preston said, his voice carrying easily in the crisp air, "if it isn't the prodigal son and his chauffeur." He looked at me then. His eyes scanned my worn work boots, my flannel shirt, the oil stain on my jacket. He looked at my truck, shaking his head with exaggerated pity. "I see you went back to your roots, Marcus." Preston laughed. "It didn't take long, did it? One day out of civilization, and you are already driving junk." Marcus gripped the iron bars. "Where are my son's things, Preston?" Preston signaled to one of the guards. The man walked to a side garage and dragged out 3 black trash bags. They were lumpy and tied haphazardly. The guard hauled them to the gate. He didn't open it. He simply lifted the bags and tossed them over the top. They hit the pavement with a wet thud. One of the bags split open. Plastic spilled out. It was Leo's Lego set, the one Marcus had spent 3 days building with him. It shattered on the asphalt pieces, scattering into the slush. Then came a stuffed bear, its face landing in a puddle of oil and dirty snow. Marcus let out a sound that was half gasp, half growl. He looked at the toys, treated like garbage, thrown like refuse. "Oops," Preston said, not even pretending to care. "Clumsy. But then again, I suppose they are just going to a place where broken things belong." "Open the gate," Marcus shouted, shaking the bars. "Open the damn gate, Preston." Preston took a step closer, safe behind his barrier. "Or what, Marcus? What are you going to do? You are a trespasser. You are a nobody." He looked from Marcus to me, his eyes full of that old confident hate. The kind of hate that doesn't need to scream because it thinks it is a fact of nature. You know, Isaiah Preston said to me using my name like an insult. I always told Victoria that this would happen. You can put a suit on a man, you can give him a job, you can let him sit at your table, but you can't change what is in the blood. He gestured to the rusted truck behind me. Look at this, he said. 20 years old. 30. It is falling apart, just like your family. Failure is genetic, Isaiah. It is in the DNA. It trickles down. Marcus never had a chance, really. He was always going to end up driving a piece of scrap metal scrounging for leftovers. It is just the natural order of things. I stood there. I didn't move. I didn't blink. I let his words hang in the air. I wanted Marcus to hear them. I wanted him to burn them into his memory. Preston reached into his coat pocket. He pulled out a checkbook. He produced a gold fountain pen and scribbled something quickly using the palm of his hand as a desk. He ripped the check out. He rolled it up and stuck it through the bars of the gate. Here, Preston said. Marcus stared at the small slip of paper fluttering in the wind. What is that? It is $5,000, Preston said. Call it a severance package. Call it charity. I don't care. Just take it. Use it to get an apartment in a neighborhood where my grandson won't get shot. Don't let the boy starve just because his father is incompetent. He smiled, a benevolent king throwing scraps to the peasants. Go on, Marcus. Take it. We both know you need it. I saw Marcus snap. The humiliation, the fear, the anger of the last 24 hours boiled over. He lunged at the gate. He reached through the bars, his hand grabbing for Preston's collar. You son of a, Marcus roared. The guards stepped forward, hands going to their belts. Preston flinched, stepping back just out of reach, his face twisting into a sneer. Do it, Preston yelled. Touch me. Give me a reason to have you arrested right now. I will bury you under the jail. Marcus was straining against the iron, his face contorted with rage. He was going to do it. He was going to climb that gate and tear Preston apart, and he was going to lose everything. He was going to lose his freedom, his son, his future. Marcus. My voice cracked like a whip. It cut through the red haze. Stand down. Marcus froze. He looked back at me, his chest heaving, tears of pure fury in his eyes. Dad, he is. I know what he is, I said calmly. Step back. Marcus hesitated, his hands still gripping the cold iron. Then slowly he let go. He stepped back, breathing hard. I walked to the gate. I walked slowly, deliberately. I stopped right in front of Preston. I looked him in the eye. He straightened his coat, trying to regain his composure, but I saw the flicker of fear. He wasn't afraid of Marcus's fists. He was unnerved by my silence. I reached out and took the check from the bars. Preston smirked. Smart man, Isaiah. Always knew when to take a handout. That is why you survived this long. I looked at the check. $5,000. Signed with a flourish. The ink was still wet. I held it up so he could see it. Then slowly, I tore it in half. Preston's smile vanished. I put the halves together and tore it again, and again, until it was nothing but blue confetti. I opened my hand and let the wind take the pieces. They swirled around Preston's expensive shoes. You keep your chump change, Preston, I said. My voice was low, but it carried the weight of a judge passing sentence. What do you think you are doing? Preston hissed. That was $5,000. You think you can afford to have pride? You are nothing. You are a retired factory worker with a rusted truck and a son who couldn't keep a job. I leaned in close to the bars. My face was inches from his. You talk a lot about blood, Preston. You talk a lot about worth, but you don't know the first thing about value. I pointed a calloused finger at him. You think you won because you locked a gate. You think you won because you wrote a check. You have no idea what you just started. I turned my back on him. I bent down and picked up the trash bags. They were heavy, wet, and smelled of the street. I threw them into the bed of my truck. I picked up the broken pieces of the Lego set one by one, while Preston watched. Get in the truck, Marcus, I said. Marcus looked at Preston one last time, then at me. He got in. I walked to the driver's side. Before I got in, I looked back at the master of the estate. You save that money, Preston, I called out. Save it for what, he scoffed. I opened my door and looked at him over the roof of the truck. You save it for the legal fees, I said, because you are going to need every dime. I slammed the door. I fired up the engine. And as we drove away, leaving Preston Sterling standing alone behind his iron bars, I knew the war had truly begun. He thought he had just humiliated us. He didn't know he had just handed me the weapon I needed to destroy him. He had made it personal. And for a man like me, personal business is the only business that matters. For 3 days, I watched my son disintegrate. Marcus would leave the house at 6 in the morning, dressed in his best suit, his resume crisp in a leather folder I had bought him years ago. He would return at 5. His tie loosened his shoulders, slumped the folder looking heavier than when he left. It was a painful thing to witness a man realizing that his merit meant nothing against the weight of a powerful enemy. I sat at the kitchen table peeling potatoes, listening to the heavy tread of his boots on the floorboards. He threw his keys on the counter. The sound was sharp, angry. They didn't even interview me, Dad, Marcus said, his voice raw. I didn't look up from the potato in my hand. Which one? Miller Industrial, he said. They have an opening for a floor manager. I am overqualified. I ran operations for Sterling for 5 years. I increased output by 20%. I know their systems better than they do. And the hiring manager looked at my name and turned pale, Marcus said, pacing the small kitchen. He made a phone call. 2 minutes later, he came back and said the position had been filled. Dad, the job was posted this morning. I set the knife down. It is Preston, I said. Marcus laughed, a bitter, jagged sound. Of course it is Preston. He has blackballed me. He has called every manufacturer in a 50-mile radius. He told them I was fired for incompetence, or theft, or God knows what. I am radioactive, Dad. I can't get a job sweeping floors in this town if the name Sterling is whispered in the hallway. He sank into a chair, putting his head in his hands. I have $74 in my checking account, he whispered. I have a son to feed. And I can't even get an interview. I wiped my hands on a towel. I wanted to tell him that he didn't need a job. I wanted to tell him that the dividends from the Jefferson Trust, which had been accumulating since 1985, made his salary look like pocket change. But he wasn't ready. He still needed to feel the fire. He needed to understand that a job is something someone gives you, but a legacy is something you take. Preston is trying to starve you out, I said. He wants you crawling back. He wants you to beg him to let you see your son on weekends, provided you sign a non-disclosure agreement and disappear. I will never beg him, Marcus spat. Good, I said, because the war hasn't even started yet. The knock on the door came an hour later. It wasn't a friendly knock. It was sharp, authoritative, the kind of knock that demands an answer. Leo was watching cartoons in the living room. He looked up, startled. I will get it, Marcus said, standing up. He looked tired. He probably thought it was a neighbor complaining about the truck parked on the street. I followed him to the hallway. I had a feeling I knew what was coming. Preston Sterling didn't just play defense. He played offense, and he played dirty. Marcus opened the door. Standing on the porch was a man in a cheap windbreaker holding a thick manila envelope. He looked at a photo in his hand, then at Marcus. Marcus Jefferson, the man asked. Yes, Marcus said. You have been served, the man said, shoving the envelope into Marcus's chest. He turned and walked away without another word. Marcus stared at the envelope. It was heavy. He ripped it open, his fingers fumbling with the clasp. He pulled out a stack of legal documents. The header was bold and black. Cook County Circuit Court. Domestic Relations Division. Marcus read the first page. His knees gave way. He slumped against the door frame, sliding down until he hit the floor. No, he gasped. No, no, no. What does it say? I asked, though I didn't need to read it. He looked up at me, his eyes wide with terror. Kidnapping Dad. He is accusing me of kidnapping Leo. He handed me the papers. I scanned them. Emergency motion for return of minor child. The affidavit claimed that Marcus Jefferson, an unstable and unemployed individual with no fixed address, had forcibly removed the minor child Leo Sterling Jefferson from the marital home without the mother's consent. It claimed that the child was in imminent danger, living in a blighted neighborhood known for gang violence. It demanded the immediate return of the child to the custody of Victoria Sterling pending a full hearing. They want him back today, Marcus choked out. It says, if I don't surrender him by 5 p.m., a warrant will be issued for my arrest. I looked at the clock. It was 2:30. They are trying to break you, son, I said. They are using the law as a hammer. But it's a lie, Marcus shouted, standing up. Victoria told me to take him. She packed his bags. She was crying, but she let us go. It doesn't matter what the truth is. Marcus, I said, tossing the papers onto the side table, it matters what they can prove in court. And right now, they have a high-priced lawyer and a narrative that fits their prejudices. You are the angry black man who dragged his son to the ghetto. They are the concerned wealthy grandparents trying to save him. We need a lawyer, Marcus said, panic rising in his voice. I need to find a public defender, or legal aid. Maybe there is a clinic. Public defenders are for people who want to plea bargain, I said. We are not making a deal. We are going to war. I walked to the closet and pulled out my heavy wool coat. It was old, but the cut was classic. Put your suit back on, Marcus. Tie your tie. Brush your hair. Where are we going? Marcus asked, wiping his eyes. We are going downtown, I said. We are going to see a man about a dog, or in this case, a shark. We drove into the city in silence. The skyline of Chicago rose up before us, steel and glass piercing the gray winter sky. We parked the truck in a garage on LaSalle Street, surrounded by Mercedes and BMWs. The attendant looked at my rusty fender with disdain, but I tossed him a $20 bill and told him to keep it close. We walked to a building that soared 50 stories into the air. The lobby was marble and gold. Men in $3,000 suits rushed past us, talking into earpieces. Marcus looked out of place, not because of his suit, but because of the fear that hung off him like a shroud. We took the elevator to the 45th floor. The doors opened onto a reception area that smelled of leather and money. A sign on the wall read, Goldman Sachs and Bergowitz. Marcus grabbed my arm. Dad, do you know where we are? This is David Goldman's firm. He is the guy who defended the governor. He charges $1,000 an hour. We can't be here. I ignored him and walked up to the receptionist. She was a young woman with glasses who looked like she guarded the gates of heaven. She looked at my flannel shirt underneath my coat, my work boots, and then at Marcus's terrified face. Can I help you? She asked, her tone suggesting that the service elevator was around the back. Tell David that Isaiah is here, I said. She blinked. Mr. Goldman is in a meeting. He does not take walk-ins. Do you have an appointment? I leaned over the desk. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't get angry. Tell him Isaiah Jefferson is here. Tell him it is about the chessboard. She hesitated. She looked at the security guard standing by the door. Then, perhaps seeing something in my eyes that unsettled her, she picked up the phone. Mr. Goldman, there is a gentleman here. He says his name is Isaiah Jefferson. He says it is about a chessboard. She paused, listening. Her eyes went wide. Yes, sir. Right away, sir. She hung up the phone and looked at me with new eyes. Mr. Goldman is coming out to get you himself, she whispered. Marcus looked at me confused. Dad, what is going on? A moment later, the double doors behind the desk swung open. A man stepped out. He was short, bald, and wore a suit that cost more than my house. He had the sharp, intelligent eyes of a predator. This was David Goldman, the most feared litigator in Chicago. He saw me. A smile broke across his face, genuine and warm. Isaiah, he boomed, ignoring the stunned looks of his staff. He walked over and gripped my hand in both of his. It has been too long, my friend. Too long. David, I said, nodding. You look good. You gained weight. The steak dinners? He laughed. And who is this? This is my son Marcus, I said. And we have a problem. A sterling problem. David's smile tightened at the edges. Sterling. As in Preston. Sterling. The same. Come in, David said, ushering us back. Come into the office, cancel my 3 o'clock, he barked at the receptionist. We walked into his office. It was a corner suite with a view of the lake that went on forever. There were mahogany bookshelves, leather chairs, and a humidor on the desk. Sit, David said. Marcus sat down on the edge of the leather chair, looking like he was afraid he might dirty it. Dad, he whispered to me, his voice trembling. We can't afford this. You don't understand. A retainer for a guy like this is $50,000. We don't have $50,000. I looked at David. He was pouring 3 glasses of water from a crystal pitcher. My son is worried about the bill, David, I said. David laughed. He handed a glass to Marcus. Son, your father is the reason I am sitting in this chair. Marcus looked from him to me. I don't understand. 30 years ago, David said, leaning back against his massive desk. I was a young lawyer with a lot of debt and no clients. Nobody wanted to hire a short Jewish guy from the wrong side of the tracks. I was about to close up shop. Then your father walked in. He pointed at me. He had a property dispute, a zoning issue with the city that was blocking him from buying a derelict warehouse district. Everyone told him to give up. He hired me. He paid me in cash every week on time, and we fought the city for 2 years. We won, I added. We won big, David said. That case made my career. It put me on the map. But more than that, your father gave me something else. When I wanted to buy this building 10 years ago, the bank was giving me the runaround. Your father, I cleared my throat. That is enough history, David. David smiled, catching my drift. He winked at Marcus. Let's just say your father has friends in low places who know people in high places. He owes me nothing. In fact, I owe him. Marcus looked at me, his mouth slightly open. He was trying to reconcile the image of the factory worker he knew with the man who had bankrolled a super lawyer. So David said, sitting down and pulling a legal pad toward him, "Tell me about Preston Sterling, and tell me why I should enjoy destroying him." "He is trying to take my grandson," I said. "He filed an emergency custody motion claiming Marcus is indigent and kidnapped the boy." David's pen stopped moving. He looked up, his eyes hard. "Indigent?" he asked Marcus. I lost my job," Marcus stammered. "I don't have a house of my own right now." David looked at me. "Isaiah, he is staying with me," I said. "And as for funds," I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out a check. It wasn't a personal check. It was a cashier's check drawn from the Jefferson Trust. I slid it across the mahogany desk. "Put this in an escrow account for Marcus," I said. David picked up the check. He looked at the amount. He didn't blink, but his eyebrows went up. $200,000, David read. Marcus gasped. "Dad, where did you get that?" I ignored him. "Is that enough to prove he isn't indigent?" I asked David. David grinned. "A shark smelling blood in the water." "Oh, Isaiah, that is more than enough. This is going to be fun." He picked up the phone on his desk. "Get me Judge Holloway on the line," he ordered, "and draft a counter motion. Defamation, malicious prosecution, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. And find out who represents Preston Sterling. I want to ruin his afternoon." He hung up and looked at Marcus. "Relax, son. You aren't losing your boy today. By the time I am done with Preston Sterling, he is going to wish he had never learned to spell the word custody." I sat back in the chair and crossed my arms. I watched my son's shoulders finally drop an inch. He wasn't safe yet, but he had armor now. And he was starting to realize that his father wasn't just an old man with a shovel. I was the general of an army he never knew existed. While Marcus paced the living room floor wearing a track into the worn carpet with his nervous energy, I knew that waiting for the courts to decide our fate was a fool's game. David Goldman was a shark in a suit, yes, but the legal system moves at the speed of a glacier, and Preston Sterling was a man who melted obstacles with money. I needed something faster. I needed dirt. And I knew exactly where to find it. I left Marcus watching the door like a sentry and drove my truck to a small diner on the outskirts of the city, the kind of place where the coffee is strong, the waitress calls you honey, and nobody asks questions. I sat in a booth at the back facing the door. 10 minutes later, a woman walked in. She was 60 years old with gray hair cut in a sensible bob and a face that had seen too much ungratefulness. Sarah Jenkins. For 30 years, she had been Preston Sterling's right hand. She knew his calendar better than his wife did. She knew his passwords, his allergies, and his lies. And 3 months ago, he had fired her. He didn't give her a severance package. He just told her she was getting too slow, too old to keep up with the new image of the company, and replaced her with a 22-year-old model who couldn't spell manufacturing. I had sent Sarah a fruit basket the day she was fired. Inside was a note that simply said, "I know the feeling." Today, I was cashing in on that fruit basket. "Isaiah," she said, sliding into the booth. "You look the same." "You look tired, Sarah," I said gently. She snorted. "Being discarded does that to a person. I heard about Marcus. It is all over the rumor mill. Preston is telling everyone he caught Marcus stealing." I gripped my coffee cup. "Stealing. Embezzling," Sarah corrected. "He is poisoning the well, Isaiah. He wants to make sure Marcus never works in this town again. I nodded slowly. It was a smart move. Evil, but smart. If Marcus was unhireable, he was broke. If he was broke, he couldn't fight for custody. Why is he doing this? Sarah, I asked. Why the sudden nuclear option? He tolerated Marcus for 7 years. Why blow it up now? Sarah leaned in, her voice dropping to a whisper. Because he is drowning Isaiah. Sterling Manufacturing is a shell. He has been bleeding cash for 5 years. He leveraged the company to buy that estate in Lake Forest. He bought the yacht. He bought the politicians. But the orders aren't coming in like they used to. I knew he was behind on rent, but I didn't know it was that deep. It is worse than rent, Sarah said. He owes the banks $50 million. They are threatening to call the loans. So he is broke, I said. Not yet, she said. He has a Hail Mary play. He is trying to take the company public, an IPO, initial public offering. He thinks if he can sell shares to the public, he can raise $100 million, pay off the debt, and walk away rich. I sat back. An IPO. That explained the sudden obsession with image. Wall Street doesn't invest in messy families. They invest in stability. They invest in legacy. That is why he needs Leo, I realized aloud. Sarah nodded. He needs the perfect family portrait. The dashing grandfather, the beautiful daughter, the heir apparent. A mixed-race son-in-law from the South Side didn't fit the brochure. But a cute, moldable grandson, that is gold. He wants to parade Leo in front of the investors as the future of the company. Look, we have the next generation ready to take over. It implies longevity. It implies stability. He wants to use my grandson as a prop, I growled. He wants to erase Marcus, Sarah said. He wants to rewrite the history. If he gets custody, he ships Marcus off to oblivion, changes Leo's last name to Sterling, and the investors never know the difference. But there is a catch, Isaiah. What is the catch? The audit. She said, a wicked glint in her eye. To go public, he needs a clean financial audit, and his books are cooked. He has been hiding losses in shell companies. He has been shifting liabilities. If anyone looked closely, really closely, the whole thing would collapse. I smiled. It was the first time I had smiled in 2 days. Sarah, I said, do you remember where those bodies are buried? I buried them, she said. I know where every single skeleton is. I slid a napkin across the table. Write down the names of the shell companies. Write down the account numbers if you remember them. She took a pen from her purse. She didn't hesitate. She wrote for 5 minutes straight. When she slid the napkin back, it was covered in ink. This stays between us, she said. I put the napkin in my pocket. I never saw you, Sarah. She stood up, smoothing her coat. Give Preston hell, Isaiah, for both of us. I drove home with the napkin burning a hole in my pocket. I had the ammunition. Now I just needed the right moment to fire. But Preston Sterling was not a man who waited to be hit. He struck first. It happened at 2 a.m. The house was dark. Marcus and Leo were asleep in the back room. I was sitting in the armchair in the living room watching the streetlights flicker through the window, my shotgun resting across my knees. I didn't sleep much these days. The street was quiet, too quiet. Then I heard it. The screech of tires, an engine revving high and loud. A car mounted the curb. I saw headlights sweep across my living room wall. Before I could stand, the first brick shattered the front window. The sound was explosive. Glass flew everywhere, glittering shards spraying across the floor. The cold night air rushed in instantly. Then came another crash, the side window. Then the sound of a bat hitting the front door, a heavy rhythmic thudding that shook the frame. "Get out!" a voice screamed from the street. "Get out of the neighborhood! We don't want you here!" I racked the slide of the shotgun. The sound was distinct, mechanical, terrifying. I threw open the front door. There were 3 of them, men in hoodies, their faces covered with scarves. They were standing on my lawn holding baseball bats and bricks. A dark sedan was idling at the curb, its engine running. "Hey!" I roared, raising the weapon. They froze. They saw the shotgun. They saw the look on my face. They were paid thugs, not soldiers. They didn't sign up to die for a paycheck. They scrambled. They dropped the bats and ran for the car. Tires squealed, smoking against the asphalt as they peeled away into the night. I didn't shoot. I didn't need the police asking why there were bodies on my lawn. I needed them to see the damage. Marcus came running into the room holding Leo. The boy was screaming, terrified by the noise and the cold. Dad, Marcus yelled, seeing the broken glass, the brick lying on the rug. What happened? Are you okay? I am fine, I said, engaging the safety on the gun. Take Leo to the kitchen. Don't let him step on the glass. I looked at the brick. Wrapped around it was a piece of paper. I picked it up. It was a note typed on plain white paper. Unsafe environment. Child Protective Services is watching. I crushed the note in my hand. This wasn't a random attack. This wasn't a neighborhood gang. This was a stage play. Preston had sent them. He wanted broken windows. He wanted a police report that said my home was a target for violence. He wanted to prove to a judge that a child couldn't be safe in the South Side. Call the police, Marcus, I said. Marcus looked at me. But Dad, if the police come, they will see this. They will write it up. It will look bad for us. Call them, I said. We are doing this by the book. The police arrived 20 minutes later. 2 officers, both young, both white, both looking like they would rather be anywhere else. They stepped over the glass, their flashlights cutting through the dark living room. Officer Miller, the older one, said, looking around with a sneer. Rough night, huh? Someone threw bricks through my window, I said. They threatened us. Miller shrugged. He didn't write anything down. He looked at the neighborhood outside. Yeah, well, that happens around here, doesn't it, gang activity? Probably just kids having fun. Fun, Marcus stepped forward, still holding a trembling Leo. They terrified my son. They had bats. It was targeted. The officer looked at Marcus. He looked at his suit trousers, which he was still wearing from the lawyer's office, and then at the shabby house. Look, buddy, Miller said. You choose to live in a war zone, you catch some shrapnel. We can file a report, but honestly, it is just going to say vandalism in a high-crime area. Nobody is going to investigate this. We have real shootings to deal with. He looked at Leo. Cute kid. Shame he has to grow up seeing this. Maybe you should think about moving him somewhere safer. You know, for his own good. I saw the look in the officer's eyes. It wasn't concern. It was a message. He had been briefed. Maybe not directly by Preston, but by someone Preston paid. The narrative was already written. The police report wouldn't say, attack on innocent family. It would say, child found in hazardous environment involving gang violence. Write the report, I said coldly. The officer sighed, pulling out his notepad. Name, Isaiah Jefferson. He scribbled it down. He didn't look for fingerprints. He didn't ask for descriptions of the men. He just wrote a few lines, tore off a carbon copy, and handed it to me. Get that glass fixed, Pops, he said. It is going to be a cold night. They walked out laughing as they got back into their cruiser. Marcus stared at the yellow slip of paper in my hand. It's over, Dad, he whispered. This is exactly what Preston wanted. He is going to take this report to the judge tomorrow. He is going to say, Look, Your Honor, I told you, they are getting attacked by gangs. The house has broken windows. It is freezing inside. He wins. He takes Leo. I looked at the report. Then I looked at the brick. Then I looked at the napkin in my pocket with the list of shell companies. He thinks he won, I said. He thinks he just checkmated us. I went to the closet and pulled out a roll of heavy plastic sheeting and a staple gun. Help me cover the windows, Marcus. But Dad, help me cover the windows. I barked. We worked in silence, the staple gun echoing in the cold room. When we were done, the wind was blocked, but the house felt like a tomb. Leo had finally fallen back asleep on the couch, wrapped in 3 blankets. I sat down opposite Marcus. He sent those men to create evidence, I said. He bought those cops to validate it. He thinks this is a custody battle. He thinks he is fighting a poor man who can be scared off with a few bricks. I pulled the napkin out of my pocket and smoothed it out on the table. But he forgot one thing, Marcus. He is trying to go public. He is under a microscope. And while he is looking at my broken windows, I am looking at his broken ledger. What is that? Marcus asked, pointing to the napkin. This, I said, tapping a name on the list, is a shell company registered in the Cayman Islands. It owns the equipment in his factory, and this one owns the patents. He is stripping the company, Marcus. He is committing fraud. So Marcus asked, how does that help us keep Leo? Because I said, my voice low and dangerous. Tomorrow morning I am not calling a glazier to fix the window. I am calling the Securities and Exchange Commission, and I am going to make an anonymous tip. Marcus looked at me. You are going to blow up the IPO. I am going to burn it to the ground, I said. Preston Sterling wanted to prove my house wasn't safe. Fine. I was going to prove his entire empire was a house of cards. And I was going to be the wind. "Get some sleep, son," I said. "Tomorrow we go on the offensive. And tell Leo not to worry about the cold. Things are about to get very hot for his grandfather." I knew that to catch a rat like Preston Sterling, I could not use cheese. I had to use poison dressed up as a 5-course meal. He was a man who prided himself on pedigree, on the right schools, on the right clubs, on the right skin tone. He would never take a lifeline from Isaiah Jefferson, the black retiree from the South Side, even if I offered him water while he was burning. His pride was the only thing bigger than his debt. So I created a ghost. I sat at my kitchen table, the plastic sheeting on the windows flapping rhythmically in the draft, and dialed a number I hadn't used in 5 years. The voice on the other end was smooth-cultured and expensive. It belonged to Jonathan Thorne, a man who made a living being a face. Jonathan wasn't a businessman. He was an actor who played the role of a venture capitalist better than the real ones did. He was tall, white, with silver hair and a jawline that looked like it had been chiseled out of granite. I hired him to be the front man for Onyx Ventures, a shell company I had registered in Delaware 20 years ago for moments exactly like this. The instructions I gave Jonathan were simple. You are representing a private equity firm looking for distressed assets in the manufacturing sector. You have heard rumors of a liquidity crisis at Sterling Manufacturing. You are offering a bridge loan, a lifeline. $10 million cash injected immediately into the company to stabilize the balance sheet before the IPO. Jonathan met Preston at the Union League Club downtown, a place where I would have been followed by security if I even walked past the front door. I wasn't there, but I didn't need to be. I had a microphone in Jonathan's pocket, and I listened to the whole thing through an earpiece while I sat in my truck 2 blocks away. I heard the desperation in Preston's voice masked by bravado. He ordered a scotch at 11 in the morning. He talked about market volatility and supply chain issues. He used a lot of buzzwords to hide the fact that he was broke. Jonathan played him like a fiddle. He nodded, he sympathized, and then he slid the term sheet across the polished oak table. $10 million, Preston. Jonathan said, his voice cool and detached. We can have it wired to your operating account by Friday. I heard the intake of breath. $10 million was exactly what Preston needed to pay off the bank loan that was about to default. It was his salvation. What are the terms? Preston asked, trying not to sound too eager. 40% equity, Jonathan said. And controlling interest in the title of the main factory facility. We want the deed held in escrow as collateral until the IPO launches. There was a silence. Giving up the deed to the factory was dangerous. It was the heart of the company. If he defaulted on the bridge loan, he would lose the physical ground his empire stood upon. That is steep, Preston muttered. 40% is aggressive. It is high risk, high reward, Jonathan replied smoothly. The street is talking, Preston. They say you are insolvent. They say the IPO is a pipe dream. Onyx Ventures is willing to bet on you, but we need security. Take it or leave it. I held my breath in the truck. This was the moment. If he walked away, I would have to find another way to crush him. But I knew men like Preston. They didn't know how to fold. They always doubled down. Where do I sign? Preston said. I smiled in the darkness of my cab. The trap was sprung. Preston had just signed over the rights to his factory to a company owned by the man he called unworthy. He had just sold his castle to the barbarian at the gate. I drove back to the bungalow feeling the weight of the victory, but also the weight of the risk. $10 million was a significant portion of my liquid assets. If this went wrong, if Preston managed to pull off the IPO and pay me back, I would make a profit, but I wouldn't get my revenge. I needed him to fail, and I was going to ensure he did. When I got home, the atmosphere was suffocating. The plastic on the windows made the light inside dim and gray. Marcus was sitting on the floor playing a board game with Leo, but his eyes were vacant. He looked like a man waiting for the executioner. He had spent the morning calling temp agencies trying to find day labor, anything to put cash in his pocket. He had been rejected everywhere. The blacklisting was effective. I went into the kitchen and poured myself a cup of coffee. I needed to make calls. I needed to move the money from the trust accounts to the Onyx Ventures holding account. I needed to liquidate some bonds. I had to do it fast, so the wire would hit Preston's bank by Friday. I picked up the landline. I didn't use my cell for this. I wanted a hard line. I dialed my broker in New York. It is Isaiah, I said when he answered. I need to move some inventory. Yes, I know the market is down. I don't care about the penalty. Marcus walked into the kitchen to get a glass of water. He froze when he heard my tone. It wasn't the voice of his father. It was the voice of a man doing a deal in a back alley. I need 10 million liquid by Thursday, I said into the phone. Yes, I know it is tight. Use the properties as leverage if you have to. I need the cash. No questions. Just get it done. The interest rate doesn't matter. Just make sure the money is clean enough to pass a casual inspection. I hung up. I wrote some figures on a notepad. I was calculating the wire transfer fees. When I looked up, Marcus was staring at me. His face was pale. His hands were shaking. Dad, he whispered. What did you just do? I covered the notepad. Just business, son. Handling some affairs. Business. Marcus's voice rose an octave. I heard you. You are talking about $10 million. You are talking about leverage. You are talking about clean money. He took a step back, looking at me with horror. Who were you talking to? Dad. Was that a loan shark? I stood up. Marcus, calm down. It is not what you think. Don't tell me to calm down, he shouted. The sound woke Leo in the other room. Marcus lowered his voice to a frantic hiss. You are borrowing money from gangsters, aren't you? You are trying to get money to hire the lawyer. You are putting this house up as collateral. You are putting your life up. He was putting the pieces together wrong, but the picture he saw was terrifying. He saw a desperate old man turning to organized crime to save his son. He saw legs getting broken. He saw violence coming to our doorstep again, just like the men with the bricks. Marcus, listen to me, I said, trying to approach him. No. He backed away, knocking a chair over. I won't let you do this. I won't let you get killed for me. I am a grown man, Dad. I am supposed to take care of you. I am not supposed to be the reason you get mixed up with people like that. He was crying now, tears of shame and fear running down his face. I heard you say the interest rate doesn't matter, Marcus sobbed. Do you know what that means? It means they own you. It means if we lose the court case, if we can't pay them back, they will kill us. They will kill you. He grabbed his coat from the hook by the door. I am leaving, he said. What I moved to block the door. You are not going anywhere. I have to, Marcus said, his eyes wild. If I am not here, you don't have to fight this battle. You don't have to borrow $10 million from the mob. I will go to a shelter. I will turn myself in. I will give Leo to Victoria. You will do no such thing, I roared. My voice shook the walls. I have to. Dad, it is the only way to save you. I am a failure. I lost my job. I lost my wife. I lost my house. And now I am going to lose my father because I am too weak to fight my own battles. I can't live with that. I can't let you destroy yourself for me. He reached for the doorknob. He was going to do it. He was going to walk out into the cold and surrender everything because he loved me too much to let me take the risk he thought I was taking. It was a noble, foolish, tragic gesture. I grabbed his wrist. My grip was like iron. You are not leaving this house, Marcus. I said, my face inches from his. Let me go. He struggled against me. I slammed him against the door. Not hard enough to hurt him, but hard enough to shock him. Listen to me, I shouted. You think I am borrowing money? You think I am begging for scraps from criminals? I let go of his wrist and stepped back, breathing hard. I had to tell him. I couldn't let him leave, but I couldn't reveal the whole plan yet. If he knew I was buying Sterling Manufacturing, he might inadvertently tip off Victoria. He might act differently. I needed him desperate, but I didn't need him sacrificial. I am not borrowing the money. Marcus, I said, my voice dropping to a harsh whisper, I am moving it. He stared at me, chest heaving. What I am moving it, I repeated. It is my money. It is our money. I am liquidating bonds. I am selling positions. I am not in debt to anyone. I am the bank, Marcus. I am the damn bank. He looked at me with total confusion. But, $10 million? You have $10 million? I have more, I said, and I am using it to buy a weapon. A weapon, a financial weapon, I said. I am buying the debt that is choking Preston Sterling. I am buying the rope he is using to hang himself. Marcus slid down the door until he was sitting on the floor. He looked at his hands, then at me. I don't understand, he whispered. Why all the secrets? Why did I think we were poor? Why did I think you were... Because I needed you to be hungry, I said, kneeling in front of him. I needed you to know what it felt like to have nothing, so you would never take having something for granted. But I pushed you too far. I see that now. I let you think you were drowning when we were on a boat the whole time. I put my hands on his shoulders. I am not doing anything foolish, Marcus. I am not doing anything illegal. I am playing the game at a level Preston doesn't even know exists. But I need you to trust me. I need you to stay in this house. I need you to hold on to your son, and I need you to let me finish this. He looked at me. The fear was still there, but the panic was receding. He wiped his nose on his sleeve like a little boy. You really have $10 million? He asked, his voice small. I nodded. And by Friday, Preston Sterling is going to have it. And in exchange, he is going to give me the keys to his kingdom. Marcus closed his eyes and let out a long, shuddering breath. Okay, he said. Okay, Dad. I believe you. He stood up shaky on his legs. But you have to promise me something, he said. Anything. When this is over, he said, his eyes hardening with a new resolve. When we win, you have to teach me. You have to teach me how to do what you do, because I never want to feel this helpless again. I never want another man to look at my son and tell him he isn't worthy. I smiled. It was a fierce, proud smile. That is the first smart thing you have said all day, I said. I went back to the phone. I had to confirm the wire transfer. The trap was set, the bait was taken, and my son was no longer trying to jump on the grenade. He was getting ready to pull the pin. Go check on Leo, I said. And Marcus? He stopped in the doorway. Yeah, don't worry about the noise tonight, I said. I am going to be making a lot of calls. We are going to war, son. And war is loud. I watched him walk away. He walked a little straighter. The misunderstanding had almost broken us, but instead it had forged something stronger. He knew now. He knew that we weren't victims. We were predators lying in the tall grass waiting for the right moment to strike. And Preston Sterling was walking right into our jaws. The courtroom smelled of floor wax and old wood, a smell that usually commanded respect, but today it smelled like a trap. We sat on the left side of the aisle, Marcus David Goldman and me. On the right sat Preston Sterling, looking like he owned the building, flanked by a team of lawyers in suits so sharp they could cut glass. And somewhere in the back, unseen but felt, was the specter of my grandson Leo, the prize in this ugly game of tug-of-war. The judge, a stern woman with glasses perched on the end of her nose, banged her gavel. The sound echoed like a gunshot. This was the preliminary hearing for temporary custody. It was supposed to be a formality, a quick check of the facts. But Preston Sterling didn't do formalities. He did executions. Preston's lead attorney stood up. His name was Vance, a man with a voice like oiled silk and eyes like a reptile. He walked to the center of the room holding a file as if it were a weapon. Your Honor, Vance began, we are here to demonstrate that the environment provided by Mr. Marcus Jefferson and his father Isaiah Jefferson is not only unsuitable, but dangerous for a child of tender years. We have already submitted the police report detailing the violent gang activity at their residence just 2 nights ago, but the danger goes deeper. It is in the blood. He turned and pointed a finger at me. We have uncovered records, Your Honor. Criminal records. Marcus stiffened beside me. He looked at me, confusion clouding his eyes. I kept my face like stone, but inside my stomach churned. I knew what was coming. It was a ghost I had buried 40 years ago. A ghost from a time when justice was a word, not a reality, for men who looked like me. Vance pulled a grainy black and white photocopy from his file. In 1968, Vance declared, his voice rising for theatrical effect. Mr. Isaiah Jefferson was arrested and charged with inciting a riot, assaulting a police officer, and disorderly conduct during the Chicago civil rights protests. He spent 6 months in county jail. He walked toward the judge, waving the paper. This is the man who is currently housing the child, a man with a documented history of violence against authority, a man with a criminal record. Is this the influence we want for a 7-year-old boy? A radical, a convict? I felt. Marcus's hand gripped my arm. Dad, he whispered, is that true? I looked straight ahead at the judge. It was true that I was arrested. It was true that I sat in a cell for 6 months listening to men scream in the night. But it was not true that I was a criminal. I was 25 years old. I was walking home from a shift at the factory. I walked past a protest. A cop didn't like the way I looked at him. He swung his baton. I put my hand up to stop it. That was the assault. That was the riot. I didn't incite anything. I said, my voice low but cutting through the silence of the courtroom. I was walking home. I was black in 1968. That was the crime. Vance smiled, a cold, predatory tightening of his lips. He ignored me. A violent past, Your Honor. A violent present. The pattern is clear. The apple does not fall far from the tree. The judge looked at the old mugshot, then at me. Her expression was unreadable. She was weighing the paper against the man sitting before her. Preston leaned back in his chair, smoothing his tie. He looked bored. He looked victorious. He had managed to turn a victim of injustice into a villain. But that was just the opening act. The main event was yet to come. Your Honor, Vance said, we call our first witness, Mrs. Victoria Sterling Jefferson. The double doors at the back of the courtroom opened. Marcus turned around so fast his chair squeaked. Victoria walked in. She looked smaller than I remembered. She was wearing a gray dress, modest, almost penitent. Her hair was pulled back. She didn't look at us. She didn't look at Marcus, who was staring at her with his heart in his eyes. She walked to the stand, her heels clicking on the floor, a sound that felt like a countdown. She took the oath. Her voice was a whisper. Victoria, Vance said, his voice dropping to a gentle, coaxing tone. Tell the court why you filed for divorce. Tell the court why you believe your husband is unfit to raise your son. Victoria looked down at her hands, which were twisting a handkerchief into knots. She took a shaky breath. Marcus. He changed, she said softly. How did he change? Vance asked. He became controlling, she said. I heard Marcus gasp, a sound of pure physical pain. He was angry all the time, Victoria continued, the words tumbling out faster now as if she had memorized a script and just wanted to get to the end of it. He blamed me for his failures at work. He blamed my father. He yelled. He threw things. He made me feel unsafe. Liar, Marcus shouted, standing up. Vicky, look at me. Tell the truth. I never touched you. I never raised my voice to you. Sit down, Mr. Jefferson, the judge barked. David Goldman pulled Marcus back into his chair. His grip was firm. Stay calm, he hissed. That is what they want. They want you to explode. Don't give them the satisfaction. Marcus sat trembling. He looked at his wife, the woman he had loved since college, the mother of his child. She was destroying him. She was painting him as a monster to save her own skin. Victoria continued, her voice gaining a little more strength, fueled by the lie. He isolated me, she said. He didn't want me to see my family. He said my bloodline was poison. He said he was going to take Leo away and I would never see him again. That is why my father had to intervene. I was scared. I am scared of him. She finally looked up. She looked past Marcus straight at her father. Preston gave her a barely perceptible nod. It was the nod of a puppet master satisfied with his marionette. I felt a cold fury rising in my chest. It wasn't just the lies. It was the cruelty. They were using her trauma, twisting it, projecting Preston's own sins onto Marcus. Preston was the one who controlled. Preston was the one who isolated. Preston was the one who used fear as a weapon. Thank you, Mrs. Sterling, Vance said, using her maiden name intentionally. No further questions. The courtroom was silent. The damage was done. The narrative was set. Marcus was an abuser. I was a violent convict. We were unfit. We were dangerous. David Goldman stood up. He buttoned his jacket slowly. He didn't look worried. He looked like a man who was about to perform a magic trick. He walked toward the witness stand. He didn't carry a file. He didn't carry notes. He just carried a small rectangular piece of paper. Mrs. Jefferson, David said, emphasizing her married name. You stated that your husband was controlling, that he made you feel unsafe. Yes, Victoria whispered. And you stated that this behavior is recent, that he changed. Yes. David nodded. He walked closer. He placed the small piece of paper on the railing of the witness stand. It was a receipt. Can you tell the court what this is? David asked. Victoria looked at it. She frowned. It looks like a bill. From where? From the office of Dr. Elaine Shapiro. Victoria read. And who is Dr. Shapiro? David asked. She is my therapist, Victoria said, her voice faltering. David turned to the judge. Your Honor, I have subpoenaed the billing records from Dr. Shapiro's office. Not the confidential session notes, of course, but the intake forms. The forms where the patient lists the primary reason for seeking treatment. He turned back to Victoria. Mrs. Jefferson, on the intake form dated 6 months ago, long before your husband allegedly changed you, listed the reason for your visit. Do you remember what you wrote? Victoria went pale. She looked at her father. Preston's smile was gone. He was leaning forward, his eyes narrowing. I don't remember, she stammered. David picked up a document from his table. Allow me to refresh your memory. Under reason for visit, you wrote severe anxiety and depression due to familial pressure and parental control. He let the words hang in the air. Parental control. And in the notes from your initial consultation, David continued, his voice sharpening. Dr. Shapiro noted that you expressed fear, but not of your husband. You expressed fear of your father. You told her that he threatened to cut you off financially if you didn't leave Marcus. You told her that he called your son a mongrel. You told her that you felt like a prisoner in your own family. Objection, Vance shouted, jumping up. This is privileged medical information. It goes to credibility, Your Honor. David roared back. The witness is claiming her husband is the abuser, but her own medical history suggests she is the victim of coercion by the very man sitting at the plaintiff's table. The judge looked at Victoria. Mrs. Jefferson, is this true? Did you tell your therapist you were afraid of your father? Victoria looked at Marcus. For the first time, she really looked at him. She saw the pain in his face. She saw the man who had held her when she cried, the man who had loved her despite her family's hatred. Then she looked at Preston. She saw the anger. She saw the threat. She started to shake. Tears spilled over, ruining her composure. I just want to go home, she sobbed. I don't know what to say. He told me I had to say it. Who told you? The judge asked sharply. Who told you to say it? Victoria opened her mouth, but no sound came out. She looked at Preston, and the terror in her eyes was answer enough. She collapsed into her hands, weeping uncontrollably. David Goldman looked at the judge. Your Honor, the witness is clearly under duress. Her testimony is tainted. We move to strike it from the record, and we submit that this entire proceeding is a sham orchestrated by Preston Sterling to manipulate this court. Preston stood up, his face red. This is outrageous. He is twisting her words. She is hysterical because of that man. He pointed at Marcus. The judge banged her gavel. Silence. All of you. She looked at Victoria, who was now being attended to by a bailiff. She looked at Preston, who was breathing hard, his mask of civility slipping. And she looked at us. I am not ruling on custody today, the judge said, her voice cold steel. This situation is volatile. I am ordering a court-appointed guardian ad litem to interview the child and all parties involved. I want a full psychological evaluation of the mother, and I want to see those therapist records in my chambers. But, Your Honor, Vance protested, the child is in danger. The only danger I see in this courtroom, the judge cut him off, is the danger of perjury. She pointed her gavel at me. Mr. Jefferson, the child stays with his father for now, but you are to remain within the jurisdiction. If I find out you have left the state, I will issue a warrant. Do you understand? I understand, Your Honor, I said. Court is adjourned until next week, she declared, banging the gavel one last time. The room erupted into noise. Marcus slumped in his chair, exhaling a breath he had been holding for an hour. He looked at Victoria, who was being led out a side door by her lawyers, shielded from view. She didn't look back. Preston Sterling stood there. He looked at me across the aisle. His eyes were full of hate, but for the first time I saw something else. Doubt. He had played his ace, his daughter, and it had backfired. He realized that his money couldn't buy memory and his power couldn't silence the truth written in a doctor's file. I stood up and buttoned my coat. Come on, Marcus, I said. Let's go home. David Goldman was packing his briefcase, a satisfied smirk on his face. Not bad for a morning's work, he said to me, but Isaiah, watch your back. You just humiliated a king in his own court. He isn't going to sue you next time. He is going to come for blood. I looked at Preston, who was arguing with his lawyer, his gestures violent and sharp. Let him come, I said. I have been bleeding for 40 years. I know how to stitch a wound. He is the one who is going to bleed out. We walked out of the courthouse into the cold Chicago afternoon. The wind was still biting, but it felt different now. It didn't feel like punishment. It felt like change. Marcus walked beside me, his head held a little higher. He had seen the cracks in the fortress. He had seen that the giant could bleed. And he knew, as I did, that this was just the beginning. The real battle wasn't in the courtroom. It was going to be in the boardroom, and I had the keys to the castle in my pocket. The most dangerous thing a man can do in business is forget where his feet are standing. Preston Sterling walked around his factory floor like a king surveying his kingdom. He looked at the massive hydraulic presses, the assembly lines churning out automotive parts, and the high ceilings of the main plant, and he saw his empire. He saw his legacy. But Preston had made a fatal mistake 50 years ago, or rather his father had. They fell in love with the building, but they forgot about the dirt. I knew about the dirt. I knew about it because in 1974, when I was working double shifts and eating beans out of a can, a failing steel company put a parcel of industrial land up for auction. It was a brownfield site, ugly and contaminated. Nobody wanted it. The banks wouldn't touch it. But I had a lawyer friend, the father of David Goldman, who told me that the city was planning to rezone the district for light manufacturing. I took every penny I had saved. I borrowed against my life insurance. I bought that land through a shell company I named after my mother, Oakhaven Properties. 6 months later, Preston's father, needing a location for his expanding operations but short on capital to buy land, signed a 50-year ground lease. It was a standard deal. Low rent for 50 years with the tenant paying for all improvements. In exchange, at the end of the term, the lease would renegotiate at fair market value. 50 years seems like forever when you are signing the paper. You think you will be dead before it comes due. You think the world will stay the same. But time is a wheel, and it had finally turned full circle. The lease on the main Sterling manufacturing facility was set to expire in exactly 28 days. I drove my truck to a small nondescript office building in the suburbs. It was the registered address of Oakhaven Properties. There was no sign on the door, just a suite number. Inside, there was no mahogany desk, no view of the lake, just a man named Arthur Henderson sitting behind a metal desk covered in files. Arthur was a good man. He was a retired accountant, white, unassuming, the kind of man you would pass in the grocery store without a second glance. For 20 years, he had been the face of my real estate holdings. He collected the checks, he signed the letters, and he took the angry phone calls so I could remain a ghost. Isaiah, Arthur said, standing up to shake my hand. He looked nervous. He wiped sweat from his forehead with a handkerchief. I got the call from Sterling's legal department yesterday. They want to exercise the renewal option. They sent over the paperwork. They are offering a 10% increase on the current rate. I sat down in the folding chair opposite him. I didn't take off my coat. 10%, I said dryly. That is generous of them. Considering the market value of that land has gone up 2,000% since 1974. Arthur nodded. They are assuming it is a formality, Isaiah. They think Oakhaven is just some passive investment fund. They don't even know who they are dealing with. They sent a standard form letter. They didn't even call. I looked at the calendar on the wall. 28 days, Arthur, I said. I want you to send a reply today. Send it by courier. Require a signature. Arthur pulled a notepad toward him. Okay. What is the counter offer? Do we want double, triple? I leaned forward. I rested my elbows on his desk. I don't want a counteroffer, Arthur. I want an eviction notice. Arthur dropped his pen. Eviction, Isaiah, that is their main plant. That is where 80% of their production happens. If we evict them, they have to move heavy machinery. It would take them a year. It would kill the company. I know, I said. That is the point. But the contract, Arthur stammered. They have a right to negotiate. Read the fine print, Arthur. Clause 14, Section B. If the landlord and tenant cannot agree on a fair market value within 30 days of expiration, the lease terminates and the tenant must vacate the premises. So we are going to give them a number they can't agree to. Arthur whispered, understanding dawning in his eyes. Tell them we have reassessed the value of the land based on its potential for commercial redevelopment, I said. Tell them the new monthly rent is 500% of the current rate, effective immediately upon renewal, and tell them we require a 5-year guarantee upfront in cash. 500%. Arthur choked. That is extortionate. That is $2 million a month. They can't pay that. They are already having cash flow problems. Exactly, I said. They can't pay it, which means they have to leave. Or they have to come to the table and beg. Send the letter, Arthur. Tell them if they do not accept the terms by Friday, they need to begin remediation of the site and removal of all structures. Arthur looked at me with a mixture of fear and awe. He had worked for me for decades, but he had never seen me use the hammer. He had only seen me build. He wrote down the instructions, his hand shaking slightly. Isaiah, he said, you know this is going to start a war. Preston Sterling is going to lose his mind. He is trying to launch an IPO. If investors find out he is about to lose his factory, the stock offering is dead in the water. I stood up. Preston Sterling started the war when he put my son on the street, I said. I am just finishing it. Send the letter, Arthur, and then turn off your phone. Because he is going to call, and I don't want you to answer. I left the office and drove back to the south side. The city felt different to me now. It wasn't just a collection of buildings, it was a chessboard, and I had just moved my queen into striking distance. While I was driving, a courier was walking into the lobby of Sterling Manufacturing. He was handing a thick envelope to the receptionist. She was signing for it, stamping the time and date, unaware that she was signing the death warrant of her employer. The envelope would travel up the elevator. It would be placed in the inbox of the legal counsel. The legal counsel, a young man who was more worried about his lunch plans than his job, would open it casually. He would read the first paragraph. He would stop chewing his sandwich. He would read it again. Then he would run down the hall to Preston's office. I wasn't there to see it, but I could feel the vibrations in the air. I could imagine Preston sitting in his leather chair looking at the projections for the IPO, dreaming of the millions he was about to make. The door bursting open, the lawyer stammering, the letter landing on the desk, Preston reading it, his face turning red, then purple, then white. 500%, vacate in 28 days. He would grab the phone. He would scream for his secretary. Get me Oak Haven Properties. Get me this Arthur Henderson. Who the hell is he? I want him on the line now. But he wouldn't get Arthur. He would get a voicemail, a polite, computerized voice telling him that office hours were over and to please leave a message. Back at my bungalow, the house was quiet. The plastic on the windows muffled the street noise. The kitchen smelled of cinnamon and oats. Leo was sitting at the table, swinging his legs a bowl of oatmeal in front of him. Marcus was sitting next to him, reading the classifieds in the newspaper, circling jobs that he wouldn't get. Dad, Marcus said, looking up as I walked in. Did you handle the business? I handled it, I said, hanging up my coat. Leo looked at me with big, trusting eyes. Grandpa, are we poor? The question hit me hard. He had been listening. He had heard the arguments, the phone calls, the fear in his father's voice. No, Leo, I said, sitting down next to him. We are not poor. We are just quiet. I poured myself a bowl of oatmeal. I added brown sugar and a splash of milk. I took a spoon and ate. It was warm, simple, sustaining. 5 miles away, Preston Sterling was likely throwing a vase against the wall. He was realizing that the ground beneath his feet, the ground he thought he owned by divine right, was shifting. He was realizing that he didn't own the factory. He didn't own the land. He owned a pile of bricks and machines that were about to become very heavy luggage. He would be calling his bankers. He would be calling his lawyers. He would be trying to find out who was behind Oak Haven Properties. But my tracks were covered. The shell company was owned by a trust, which was owned by another holding company in Nevis. By the time he unraveled the thread, the eviction date would have passed. My phone rang. It was Arthur calling my burner cell. He got the letter. Arthur set his voice tight. He left 12 messages in 10 minutes. He is screaming Isaiah. He says he is going to sue. He says this is illegal. He says he knows people. Let him scream, I said, blowing on a spoonful of oatmeal. Did you answer no? I forwarded the calls to the service like you said. Good. Let him sweat over the weekend. Silence is a powerful negotiator, Arthur. I hung up. Marcus looked at me. Who was that? Just a tenant, I said. Having some trouble with the lease. Marcus went back to his paper. He didn't know that the tenant was the man who had ruined his life. He didn't know that while he was circling minimum wage jobs, I was busy evicting a millionaire. I watched Leo eat his breakfast. He was scraping the bottom of the bowl, enjoying the sugar. He didn't know his grandfather was a shark. He just knew I made good oatmeal. And for now, that was enough. But Preston Sterling knew. Somewhere in that glass tower, surrounded by his awards and his ego, he was feeling the first true pang of terror he had felt in decades. He was realizing that money couldn't solve this, because the person on the other end of the deal didn't want his money. They wanted his pain. Preston Sterling was about to learn that you can't build a castle in the sky if you don't own the dirt. And I owned all the dirt. The rain that night was not just rain, it was a judgment. It hammered against the plastic sheeting on my windows with the rhythm of a judge's gavel, relentless and unforgiving. Chicago storms in late winter are cold enough to freeze the breath in your lungs, turning the streets into slick black mirrors that reflect only the darkness above. Inside the bungalow, the air was thick with a different kind of pressure. Marcus was sitting at the kitchen table staring at a legal pad trying to map out a defense for a custody battle that felt increasingly like a knife fight in a dark room. He hadn't slept properly since the hearing. The image of his wife on the witness stand lying about him with a face devoid of love had burned a hole in his soul that no amount of whiskey could fill. I was in my armchair cleaning my shotgun, not because I expected trouble, but because the mechanical motion of oiling steel calmed my mind. I was thinking about Preston Sterling. I was thinking about the eviction notice that was currently sitting on his desk like a ticking bomb. He was cornered, and a cornered rat doesn't fight fair. It bites anything that gets close. I knew he would make a move soon. I just didn't expect that move to land on my doorstep at 2 a.m. It started with a pounding on the door. It wasn't the rhythmic knock of the police or the aggressive bang of a thug. It was frantic, desperate, a chaotic drumming of fists against wood that screamed of terror. Marcus jumped up his chair, scraping loudly against the floor. He looked at me, his eyes wide. "Stay back," I said, engaging the safety on the shotgun and setting it beside the chair. I stood up, my knees protesting the damp cold. I walked to the door. The pounding didn't stop. "Open up. Please, God, please open the door." The voice was muffled by the wind and the wood, but it cut through Marcus like a physical blow. He froze in the hallway. He knew that voice. It was the voice of the woman who had sworn to love him and then sworn to destroy him. Victoria. Marcus moved before I could stop him. He ripped the door open. The storm blew in, bringing with it a gust of freezing rain, and a woman who looked like she had been broken into pieces and glued back together wrong. Victoria stood on the porch, soaked to the bone. Her expensive coat was ruined, mud splattered up her legs, her hair matted against her skull. She was shaking so hard her teeth chattered, a sound like porcelain rattling in an earthquake. She looked at Marcus, her eyes huge and wild, rimmed with smeared mascara. "Marcus," she sobbed, reaching out a hand that was blue with cold. Marcus stared at her. For a second, I saw the husband in him want to reach out, want to cover her, want to save her. But then I saw the memory of the courtroom flash behind his eyes. I saw the betrayal harden his heart into stone. He didn't step forward. He stepped back. "Get out," Marcus said. His voice was low, trembling with a rage that terrified me more than his shouting ever could. "Marcus." "Please," Victoria cried, stepping over the threshold. "I had nowhere else to go. He is crazy. My father is crazy." "Get out," Marcus roared. He shoved her back. Not hard, not violent, but with enough force to show her she was unwanted. She stumbled onto the wet porch, catching herself on the railing. "You come here," Marcus screamed, the veins in his neck bulging. "After what you did. After you stood up there and told the world I abused you, after you tried to take my son. You have the nerve to come to this house. I didn't want to." Victoria wailed, the rain mixing with her tears. "He made me. You don't understand, Marcus. He controls everything. He threatened me. He threatened you." Marcus laughed, a sound devoid of humor. "So that makes it okay to destroy me? To lie about the father of your child? Go back to your mansion, Victoria. Go back to your daddy. We don't want you here." He reached for the door to slam it in her face. "Wait!" Victoria screamed, throwing her body weight against the wood. "You don't understand. I ran away. I escaped. He is selling me, Marcus. He is selling me." Marcus stopped. He looked at her, confusion warring with his anger. "What are you talking about, Preston?" She choked out, shivering violently. "The eviction notice came today. He went insane. He started throwing things. He smashed the antique vase in the hallway. He said the company is dead without a merger. He said he found a partner." She looked up at Marcus, her eyes pleading for him to understand the horror of her reality. "Jameson Vance," she whispered, "the son of his lead attorney, the one who attacked your father in court. Preston made a deal with his father. If I marry Jameson, his firm will represent Sterling Manufacturing for free and inject capital to save the factory." I stood in the shadows of the hallway listening. It made sense. It was a medieval solution for a medieval man. Preston Sterling viewed his daughter not as a person but as an asset, a bargaining chip to be traded when the coffers ran low. He was losing his land, he was losing his credit, so he was selling his bloodline to save his bricks. "He told me tonight," Victoria sobbed. "He told me the wedding is in 2 weeks. He said if I refused, he would have me committed. He said he has doctors on payroll who will say I am unstable. He said I would never see Leo again." She sank to her knees on the wet porch, a puddle of misery. "I ran, Marcus. I waited until they were asleep, and I ran. I didn't take my car because it has a tracker. I walked. I walked 3 miles to the train station. I came here because you are the only person who ever actually loved me." Marcus looked down at her. I could see the conflict tearing him apart. He hated her for what she had done, but he loved her for what she had been. He looked at me seeking guidance, seeking permission to be soft. I stepped out of the shadows. "Close the door, Marcus," I said. He looked at me. "Dad, I said, "Close the door," I commanded. "You are letting the heat out." Marcus looked at Victoria, then at me. He stepped back. Victoria crawled inside, collapsing onto the rug in the entryway, water pooling around her. Marcus slammed the door shut, cutting off the wind, but the storm was now inside the house. He looked at her with disgust. "She can't stay here, Dad," Marcus said, his voice hard. "She is a spy. She is a liar. She is going to run back to him the moment it gets hard, just like she always does. She is dangerous." I looked at Victoria. She lay on the floor shivering, looking up at me with the eyes of a trapped animal. She expected me to kick her. She expected me to throw her back into the cold. She knew I had every right to. She had insulted my home, my name, and my son. "Get up," I said to her. She scrambled to her feet, hugging herself, her teeth chattering. "Marcus is right," I said, my voice flat. "You are a liability. You broke this family. You chose your comfort over your conscience. You let your father use you as a weapon against the man you married. I know," she whispered. "I am so sorry, Isaiah." "Sorry doesn't fix a broken window," I said, "and it doesn't fix a broken trust. You are not a guest here, Victoria. You are a refugee, and refugees have to earn their keep." "Dad, no," Marcus shouted. "She testified against me. She can't stay." "This is my house, Marcus," I barked, silencing him, "and in my house we do not turn away people who are running for their lives, not even enemies." I turned back to Victoria. "You can stay, but you are not sleeping in the guest room. You are not sleeping in Marcus's bed. You are sleeping on that couch." I pointed to the worn sofa in the living room. "And you are going to stay there until I say otherwise. You are going to look at the cracks in the ceiling. You are going to feel the draft from the window your father's goons broke. You are going to live in the reality you tried to sneer at." "Thank you," she sobbed. "Thank you, Isaiah. I am not doing this for you," I said coldly. "I am doing this because I am not your father. I don't treat people like garbage just because I can." I walked closer to her. She smelled of rain and expensive perfume that had turned sour. "But understand this, Victoria. You are here on probation. You say you want to escape him. You say you want to be free. Then you have to help us bury him." She looked at me, wiping wet hair from her face. "How I don't have any money." He cut my cards. "I don't have anything." "You have his secrets," I said. She blinked. "What?" "You lived in that house," I said. "You heard his phone calls. You saw his papers. Sarah told me about the shell companies, but Sarah was on the outside of the private office. You were on the inside." Victoria hesitated. She looked at Marcus, who was standing with his arms crossed, glaring at her. She looked at the peeling wallpaper. She realized that this was it. This was the only lifeboat left in the ocean. I know his passwords," she whispered. The air in the room changed. It went from heavy to electric. "What passwords?" Marcus asked, stepping closer. "For the system," Victoria said, her voice gaining a little strength. "The home server. He keeps a backup of everything at the mansion. The accounting. The real accounting. Not the one he shows the IRS. He thinks no one knows the login except him. But I saw him type it in once. I memorized it." She looked at me. "It is his birthday backwards, followed by the name of his first dog. He is arrogant. He doesn't think he needs security inside his own home." I looked at Marcus. He was staring at his wife, seeing her not as a traitor, but as a key. "Can you access it remotely?" I asked. Victoria nodded. "If I have a computer. I can log into the cloud backup. I can show you where the money really went. I can show you the bribes. I can show you the fraud." I walked to the kitchen and grabbed my laptop. It was an old ThinkPad, heavy as a brick, but it worked. I brought it to the living room and set it on the coffee table in front of the sofa. "Sit down," I said. Victoria sat. Her hands were shaking so bad she could barely type. She took a breath, closed her eyes for a second, and then her fingers started moving. Marcus and I stood behind her watching the screen. A login prompt appeared. "Sterling private server." She typed GNILRETS 1955 BUSTER. She hit enter. The screen spun for a second, then it blinked green. Access granted. Files began to populate the screen. Thousands of them. folders labeled Cayman Loan Modification Offshore Transfers Payoffs. It was the mother lode. It was the smoking gun, the bullet, and the fingerprint all in one. Victoria looked up at me. Is this enough? I looked at the screen. It was more than enough. It was a map of Preston Sterling's corruption. It was the proof that his empire was built on theft and lies. It is a start, I said. I looked at her. She was shivering again, the adrenaline wearing off, leaving her cold and wet. Marcus, I said, get her a blanket and get her some dry clothes. One of my old shirts will do. Marcus hesitated. He looked at the screen, then at his wife. He didn't forgive her. I could see that. But he respected the kill. He walked to the back room and came back with a wool blanket and a flannel shirt. He tossed them onto the couch next to her. He didn't hand them to her. He threw them. Put these on, he said roughly, and then start downloading. We need everything. Victoria nodded, pulling the blanket around her shoulders. She looked small. She looked defeated. But for the first time in her life, she was useful. I walked to the window and looked out at the storm. The rain was still falling, but I didn't feel the cold anymore. I felt the heat of the fire we were about to start. Preston Sterling had tried to sell his daughter to save his company. Instead, he had sent her straight to the enemy with the blueprints to his destruction. He thought he was playing chess. He thought he was moving pieces on a board. He didn't realize that the queen had just defected, and she had brought the king's head with her. Rest up, Victoria, I said to the reflection in the glass. Tomorrow you are going to help us burn your father's house down. The invitation on the screen of my laptop glowed with a pretentious gold font that seemed to mock the very idea of charity. The Sterling Foundation Annual Gala, a night of hope and prosperity. It was being held at the Drake Hotel in the Gold Coast Room, a place where the chandeliers cost more than the collective net worth of my entire neighborhood. Preston Sterling was throwing a party to save his soul, or at least the appearance of it. He had invited the titans of Chicago industry, the politicians, the bankers, and the media. He wanted to show them that Sterling manufacturing was strong, vibrant, and ready for the public market. He wanted to dazzle them with champagne and caviar so they wouldn't notice the rot in the foundation or the eviction notice burning a hole in his pocket. I stood in the center of my small living room and looked at Marcus. He was sitting on the sofa, still wearing the flannel shirt I had lent him, staring at the floor. He looked defeated. He looked like a man who was waiting for the other shoe to drop, unaware that I was the one wearing the boots. "Get up, Marcus," I said. He looked up, his eyes weary. "What is it, Dad?" "Do we have to move Victoria's car?" "No," I said. "You have a fitting." He frowned. "A fitting? For what?" "For your armor," I said. I walked to the closet in the hallway. I pushed aside the heavy winter coats and the old rain slickers. In the back, hanging in a black garment bag that had never been opened, was a suit. I had ordered it 3 months ago from a tailor on Savile Row in London, who owed me a favor for handling a delicate import issue in the 80s. I had intended to give it to Marcus for his birthday, a gift to remind him that he was royalty, even if he didn't feel like it. But tonight it wasn't a gift. It was a uniform. I pulled the bag out and unzipped it. The fabric was midnight blue wool, so fine it felt like water against the skin. The lining was silk, patterned with a subtle paisley that only the wearer would know was there. "Put this on," I commanded. Marcus stood up and touched the fabric. "Dad, this is bespoke. Where did you get this?" "It doesn't matter where I got it," I said. "It matters where you are wearing it. Tonight we are going to a party." He looked at me as if I had lost my mind. "A party? Dad, are you crazy? Preston is hunting us. Victoria is hiding in your living room. We are in the middle of a war." "Exactly," I said. "And in war, you don't hide in a bunker while the enemy parades around the city. You march right up to his tent and you let him see that you are still standing." "But we aren't invited," Marcus protested. I smiled. It was a cold, hard smile. "When you own the debt, Marcus, you are always invited. You just have to remind them who holds the note." It took him 20 minutes to get dressed. When he stepped out of the bathroom, he didn't look like the broken man I had found on the park bench. The suit fit him like a second skin. It broadened his shoulders. It straightened his spine. He looked like a CEO. He looked like a man who could buy and sell Preston Sterling before breakfast. I put on my own suit. It was older, a charcoal gray 3-piece I had worn to bury my wife and to close the deal on the logistics center. It smelled of cedar and history. I tied my tie in a Windsor knot, tight and precise. "We are not taking the truck tonight," I said. I called a car service, not Uber, a private black car service that catered to the executives I worked with through my shell companies. When the black Lincoln Navigator pulled up to the curb of my crumbling street, the neighbors peeked out from behind their curtains. They saw two black men in suits that cost more than their cars step into the vehicle with the grace of kings. The drive downtown was silent. Marcus was nervous, twisting the gold ring on his finger, the only thing he had left from his marriage. "Dad, what if he throws us out?" Marcus whispered as we neared the Drake. "What if he humiliates us again?" "He can try," I said. "But tonight the audience is different. Tonight he is performing for the money men, and money men hate a scene." We pulled up to the entrance. The red carpet was rolled out under the awning. Photographers were snapping pictures of women in gowns and men in tuxedos. The air smelled of expensive perfume and exhaust fumes. We stepped out. The flashbulbs popped not because they knew who we were, but because we looked like we belonged. Marcus buttoned his jacket. He took a deep breath. I put a hand on his back. "Head up," I whispered. "You are a Jefferson. You built his company. Tonight, you take the credit." We walked up the red carpet. I saw the confusion in the eyes of the other guests. They didn't recognize us. They saw two black men in power suits and assumed we were athletes or politicians or foreign investors. They stepped aside. We reached the check-in desk. A young woman with a clipboard and a headset looked at us. She smiled, but her eyes flicked up and down, assessing our worth. "Name?" she asked. "Isaiah Jefferson," I said. "And Marcus Jefferson." She scanned the list. Her finger went down the page once, then twice. Her smile faltered. "I am sorry, sir," she said, her voice dripping with fake apology. "I don't see your names on the list. Is it possible you are at the wrong event?" "I am not at the wrong event," I said, my voice carrying over the chatter of the crowd. "Check again." She checked. "No, sir. This is the Sterling Gala. It is a private event. Invitation only." Behind her, I saw movement. Preston Sterling had been standing near the entrance to the ballroom holding a glass of champagne, laughing with a senator. He turned. He saw us. His face went through a transformation that was fascinating to watch. Shock, then rage, then a cruel, twisted delight. He handed his glass to a waiter and walked toward us. He didn't rush. He strolled, savoring the moment. He thought we had come to beg. He thought we had come to make a scene that he could use to prove we were unstable. "Well, well," Preston said, his voice booming so that everyone nearby stopped talking and turned to look. "Look what the cat dragged in." He stopped in front of us, blocking the way. He looked Marcus up and down, sneering at the suit. "Nice costume," Marcus. Preston laughed. "Did you rent it, or did you spend that charity check I gave you?" Marcus didn't flinch. He looked his father-in-law in the eye. "I am here to talk, Preston." "Talk?" Preston scoffed. "You had your chance to talk. Now you are trespassing." He turned to the crowd, spreading his arms wide, playing to the gallery. "Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for this interruption. It seems my former employee and his father have confused the Drake Hotel with a homeless shelter." A ripple of laughter went through the crowd. It was nervous laughter, cruel laughter. The elite of Chicago were watching a man they considered a peer humiliate people they considered beneath them. "This is a gala for the elite," Preston continued, stepping closer to me, his breath smelling of expensive scotch. "It is a night for the titans of industry. It is not a soup kitchen for the unemployed and the unworthy. You don't belong here, Isaiah. You never did. Your blood is dirt. Now get out before I have security throw you into the street where you belong." He snapped his fingers. Two large security guards started to move toward us. Marcus tensed his hands, curling into fists. I didn't move. I didn't look at the guards. I looked past Preston's shoulder. Walking through the lobby doors was a man with white hair and a cane. He was surrounded by an entourage of assistants. He moved with the slow, deliberate pace of a man who owns time itself. It was Charles Whitmore, the chairman of the Chicago Commercial Bank, the man who held the keys to half the vaults in the city, the man whose signature was on the loans that were currently strangling Preston Sterling. Preston saw him too. His face lit up. He turned away from us, eager to greet the most important man in the room. "Charles," Preston exclaimed, walking toward him with his hand extended. "I am so glad you could make it. We were just—" Charles Whitmore didn't look at Preston. He didn't take Preston's hand. He walked right past him. He walked straight to me. The room went silent. The security guards stopped. Preston froze, his hand still extended in the air, a statue of rejected arrogance. Charles Whitmore stopped in front of me. He leaned on his cane and looked me up and down. Then a genuine smile broke across his face. "Isaiah?" he asked, his voice filled with warmth and respect. "Isaiah Jefferson." I nodded. "Good evening, Charles." Charles chuckled and stepped forward, gripping my hand in a firm shake. "My God, it has been years. I haven't seen you since the shareholders' meeting in Zurich." "Zurich," I agreed. "The winter of '98. It was cold." Charles laughed. "You are the only man I know who complains about the cold in Switzerland while closing a $50 million acquisition." He turned to the crowd, his arm still resting on my shoulder. Preston Charles called out, not looking at the stunned host. "You didn't tell me you were friends with Isaiah Jefferson. If I had known he was coming, I would have arrived an hour ago. This man is a legend. He taught me everything I know about industrial real estate arbitrage." The silence in the room was absolute. You could hear the ice melting in the champagne buckets. Preston Sterling stood there, his mouth opening and closing like a fish on a dock. His face had drained of all color. He looked from Charles to me, his brain trying to compute an equation that didn't make sense. Isaiah Jefferson, the factory worker, the man with the rusted truck. A legend. Zurich. $50 million. I don't understand. Preston stammered, his voice weak. "You know him?" "Know him." Charles laughed. "Preston Isaiah Jefferson is the largest individual depositor in my bank. He owns more commercial square footage in the Midwest than you and I combined. He is the ghost of the Chicago Exchange." Charles looked at me confused. "But Isaiah, you are a recluse. You never come to these things. Why are you here?" I looked at Preston. I looked at him with the weight of 40 years of silence, 40 years of being underestimated, 40 years of letting men like him think they were the kings of the world while I built the ground they walked on. I looked at his pale face, his trembling hands, the fear that was starting to dawn in his eyes as he realized the magnitude of his mistake. I stepped forward. I smoothed the lapel of my jacket. "I came to check on my investment, Charles," I said, my voice carrying to every corner of the room. "Investment," Preston whispered. I looked Preston dead in the eye. "I heard you were having some cash flow problems, Preston. I heard you were struggling to pay your rent." I paused, letting the words sink in. "So I came to see how my debtor lives." The gasp that went through the room was louder than any applause. Preston took a step back, stumbling. He looked at Marcus, who was standing tall, a small smile playing on his lips. He looked at me. And for the first time he saw not a black man from the South Side, but the executioner who had come to collect his due. I smiled. "Nice party, Preston. I hope you saved the receipt. You are going to need the write-off." The whisper started low, like the hum of a high-voltage wire before it snaps, but within minutes it was the only sound in the room. Charles Whitmore had walked away to get a drink, leaving me standing there like a monolith in the center of the Gold Coast room. The guests, the titans of Chicago industry, the women dripping in diamonds, and the men who measured their worth in quarterly earnings were no longer looking at Preston Sterling. They were looking at me. I saw the phones come out. I saw the frantic texting. The name Isaiah Jefferson was being typed into search bars and private databases. They were calling their brokers. They were calling their risk management officers. They were asking one question: who is this black man that the chairman of the commercial bank treats like a king? And why is he here to check on an investment? The air in the room shifted. It went from a celebration to an autopsy. Investors who had been lining up to shake Preston's lapel suddenly remembered they had urgent phone calls to make. A man I recognized as the head of a major pension fund stepped back from Preston as if he were contagious. The space around Preston grew. He was standing alone on his own red carpet, isolated by the sudden radioactive doubt that I had brought into the room. Preston looked around, his eyes darting from face to face. He saw the shift. He saw the suspicion. He saw his IPO crumbling before it even launched, because confidence is a fragile thing. It takes years to build and seconds to break. And I had just taken a sledgehammer to his foundation. He looked at me. The hate in his eyes was so pure it was almost beautiful. He didn't scream. He didn't make a scene. That would have been the final nail in his coffin. Instead, he walked over to me, his movement stiff and jerky like a marionette with tangled strings. He grabbed my elbow. His grip was hard, painful, a physical threat masked as a friendly gesture. A word, Isaiah, he hissed through a frozen smile. In private. I looked at Marcus. He was standing a few feet away watching the crowd with a look of vindication. I nodded to him. "Stay here," I signaled. "Enjoy the show." I let Preston lead me away from the ballroom down a long corridor lined with oil paintings of dead white men and into a small private library. The room smelled of old paper and arrogance. Preston slammed the heavy oak door behind us, shutting out the murmur of the crowd. The silence that followed was heavy and violent. He turned on me, his face contorted into a mask of fury. "You son of a bitch," he spat. "Who do you think you are? You think you can walk in here in a rented suit and con Charles Whitmore? I don't know what kind of game you're playing. I don't know what lies you told him, but it ends now." He paced the room, his hands shaking. "You are a fraud, Isaiah. You are a grifter. You probably researched Charles, found out where he would be, and staged this whole thing. Well, I am not buying it. I know who you are. You are a nobody. You are trash, and I am going to expose you." He pointed a finger at my chest. "I am going to call the police," he threatened, his voice rising. "I am going to have you arrested for trespassing, for fraud, for harassment. You are going to leave this hotel in handcuffs, and I am going to make sure you die in a cell. Do you hear me? I will bury you." I stood by the fireplace watching him unravel. He was desperate. He was terrified. He was trying to use the only weapons he had ever known, intimidation and the law. But he didn't realize that the law was no longer on his side. "Are you finished?" I asked calmly. "No, I am not finished," he screamed. "You ruined my night. You embarrassed me in front of my investors. You are going to pay for this. I want you out of here." Now I reached into the inner pocket of my jacket. Preston flinched, stepping back as if he thought I was pulling a gun. In a way, I was. I pulled out a thick manila envelope. It wasn't the one filled with legal threats that he had sent Marcus. It was something far more dangerous. I tossed it onto the coffee table between us. It landed with a heavy thud. "Read it," I said. Preston looked at the envelope. He looked at me. "What is this?" "It is the reason you aren't calling the police," I said. He hesitated, then snatched the envelope up. He ripped it open. He pulled out the stack of papers. I watched his eyes scan the first page. It was a summary of his private ledger. The real one. The one Victoria had downloaded from his home server while sitting on my worn-out sofa wrapped in a flannel shirt. I saw the color drain from his face. He flipped the page, then another. His hands started to shake so badly the papers rattled. This is impossible," he whispered. "Where did you get this?" "Page 4, I said. "The Cayman accounts. You have been funneling company assets into shell corporations to hide losses. That is fraud, Preston. Securities fraud. Wire fraud. Tax evasion." I took a step closer. "Page 10, I continued. "The vendor kickbacks. You have been overpaying suppliers owned by your friends and taking a cut under the table. That is embezzlement. That is stealing from your own shareholders." He looked up at me, his eyes wide with horror. He looked like a man who had woken up to find a knife at his throat. You hacked me," he stammered. "This is illegal. You can't use this. It is inadmissible." I laughed. It was a dry, cold sound. "I didn't hack you, Preston. Your security system did exactly what it was supposed to do. It let in a member of the family." He froze. "Family Victoria," I said. He dropped the papers. They scattered across the expensive rug like autumn leaves. "Victoria," he whispered. She wouldn't. She is my daughter." "She was your daughter," I corrected him. "Until you tried to sell her. Until you tried to trade her like a piece of livestock to save your sinking ship. She came to me, Preston. She came to the man you called unworthy. And she gave me the keys to your coffin." He sank into a leather armchair, his legs giving out. He looked at the papers surrounding him, the evidence of his crimes, his greed, his failures. This destroys the IPO," he murmured. "If the SEC sees this, the SEC already has it." I lied, or maybe I didn't. Maybe Sarah had already made the call. It didn't matter. The threat was enough. "But that isn't the worst part, Preston," I said. He looked up at me defeated. "What could be worse? I am ruined. You are ruined." "Yes," I said, "but you are also homeless." He frowned, confusion breaking through his despair. "What are you talking about? I own this company. I own the factory." I reached into my pocket again. I pulled out a single sheet of paper. It was the deed to the land at 400 Industrial Parkway. the land where Sterling Manufacturing had stood for 50 years. You own the building, Preston, I said. You own the bricks and the mortar and the machines. But you forgot the golden rule of real estate. Location, location, location. I unfolded the deed and held it up. You don't own the dirt, I said. He stared at the document. He read the name of the owner. Oak Haven Properties. I know Oak Haven, he said, his voice shaking. We have a lease. We sent the renewal. It is automatic. I shook my head. Read the renewal clause, Preston. If the parties cannot agree on a fair market value, the lease terminates. So we negotiate, he said, desperate hope flaring in his eyes. We can pay more. We can... You received a letter 3 days ago, I interrupted. A letter from Oak Haven Properties. It set the new rent at 500% of the current rate. He went pale. That was you. You are Oak Haven. Oak Haven was my mother's name, I said. I bought that land in 1974. I bought it with the overtime pay you denied your black workers. I bought it with the scraps you threw away. And I waited. I waited 50 years for this moment. I leaned down, getting right in his face. The lease expired at midnight, Preston. Today is a new day. And you are trespassing. He couldn't breathe. He was gasping for air, clutching his chest. The reality was crushing him. The factory was his only asset. Without the land, the factory was worthless. Without the factory, the company was dead. Without the company, he was nothing. You are standing on my dirt, I whispered. And I want you off. Please, he begged, tears streaming down his face. Isaiah, please. We can work this out. I can give you shares. I can give you a seat on the board. Don't do this. This is my life. This is my legacy. Your legacy. I stood up, straightening my jacket. You told my son his blood wasn't worthy. You threw my grandson into the snow. You tried to destroy my family because you thought you were better than us. I walked to the door. You don't have a legacy, Preston. You have a debt. And I am here to collect. I opened the door. The sound of the gala drifted in laughter, clinking glasses, the music of the rich and oblivious. Isaiah, he screamed, scrambling out of the chair. Wait. What do you want? I will give you anything. I looked back at him one last time. He was on his knees, surrounded by the proof of his corruption, broken and pathetic. I want you to go out there, I said, pointing to the ballroom. I want you to smile. I want you to shake hands. And I want you to know that every person in that room is about to find out that you are a fraud. I stepped out into the hallway. And Preston, I added, get off my property by morning, or I will have the sheriff remove you. I closed the door on his screaming. I walked back down the corridor, feeling lighter than I had in 40 years. The air in the ballroom felt cleaner. I found Marcus standing by the bar, holding a glass of water. He looked at me, his eyes asking the question. Is it done? He asked. It is done, I said. Let's go, I told him. We have a factory to inspect. We left the Drake Hotel, leaving Preston Sterling alone in his private hell. The rumors were already spreading like wildfire. By morning, the stock would be worthless. By noon, the banks would call the loans. By evening, Preston Sterling would be a memory. But we weren't done yet. A cornered rat bites hardest right before it dies, and Preston Sterling still had one desperate move left to make. He wasn't going to go down quietly. He was going to try to burn the whole world down with him. I knew it, and I was ready for it, because I had one more camera he didn't know about, and it was watching his every move. The smell of smoke hit the south side before the sirens did. It was a heavy, acrid scent, the smell of burning rubber and melting steel carried on the wind from the industrial district miles away. I stood on my porch at 3 a.m, watching the orange glow pulse against the low clouds like a second sunrise. I didn't need to turn on the news to know what was burning. I knew the location, I knew the address, and I knew exactly who had lit the match. Preston Sterling had run out of moves on the chessboard, so he had decided to flip the table. He was a desperate man, and desperate men do not calculate, they react. He needed the insurance money, he needed a victim, and he needed to destroy the credibility of the man who held his fate in his hands. He had decided to burn down his own legacy just to make sure my son burned with it. I went back inside and sat in the armchair facing the door. I did not wake Marcus. He needed every second of peace he could get. because the storm was coming, and this time it wasn't bringing rain, it was bringing the law. They arrived at 4:15. I saw the blue lights flashing through the plastic sheeting on the windows, painting my living room in chaotic strobes of azure and shadow. There were no polite knocks this time. There was no process server with a manila envelope. The front door exploded inward. A battering ram hit the lock and the wood splintered with a sound like a gunshot. Men in tactical gear swarmed into my small hallway screaming commands. Police. Get down. Hands where we can see them. Marcus ran out of the back room wearing only his boxers and a t-shirt, his eyes wide with sleep and terror. He saw the guns pointed at him. He saw the laser sights dancing on his chest. "Dad!" he screamed. "Get on the ground!" An officer roared, kicking Marcus in the back of the knees. Marcus went down hard, his face hitting the floorboards. They were on him instantly, knees in his back, zip ties biting into his wrists. I stood up slowly, my hands raised calmly. "There is a child in the house." I said, my voice steady over the shouting. "Do not go into the back room with weapons drawn." They ignored me. 2 officers rushed past Marcus towards the bedroom where Leo was sleeping. "No," Marcus screamed, struggling against the weight of the men on top of him. "Don't touch him, Leo." Then came the sound that broke my heart. A high-pitched, terrified shriek. My 7-year-old grandson waking up to monsters in his room. An officer carried him out under one arm like a football while Leo kicked and screamed for his father. "Let him go," I said, stepping forward. "Sit down, old man," an officer barked, pushing me back into the chair. I sat. I watched them drag my son out into the snow without shoes. I watched them hand my screaming grandson to a social worker who had been waiting in a car outside. I saw the neighbors' lights flicking on down the street. I saw the shame being manufactured in real time. "What is the charge?" I asked the officer guarding me. "Arson," he spat. "And insurance fraud. And attempted murder. There was a security guard in that warehouse. He is in critical condition. Your son tried to burn the place down with a man inside." I looked at him. Arson. It was perfect. Marcus used to be the operations manager. He knew the layout. He knew the security codes. He had a motive. He had just been fired. It was a narrative so clean it could only have been written by Preston Sterling. "They found the gas cans in his trunk," the officer added, sneering at me, "along with the accelerant. We got him dead to rights." Of course they did. Preston hadn't just framed him, he had gift-wrapped him for the prosecutor. They took Marcus away in the back of a squad car. They took Leo away in a separate van. They left me sitting in my living room with a broken door and a cold wind blowing through the house for the second time in a week. I stood up. I put on my coat. I put on my hat. I walked out to my truck, which the police had searched and left with the doors open. I closed them. I didn't drive to the jail. I drove to the precinct. I sat in the plastic chair in the waiting room of the 12th District Station. It was a place of misery, smelling of stale coffee and unwashed bodies. On the wall, a television was mounted in a cage tuned to the morning news. And there he was. Preston Sterling stood in front of the burning skeleton of his factory. The flames were still licking at the twisted steel beams behind him. He was wearing a suit that looked slightly disheveled, his tie loosened just enough to suggest a man who had been working all night to save his empire. He looked into the camera, his eyes wet with tears. "It is a tragedy," Preston said, his voice breaking perfectly. "A complete tragedy. We built this company from nothing. We provided jobs for this community. And to see it destroyed by someone we welcomed into our family, it is heartbreaking." The reporter held the microphone closer. "Police say your son-in-law is the prime suspect, Mr. Sterling." Preston wiped a tear away. "Marcus was troubled. We tried to help him. We gave him a job. We gave him a home. But when we had to let him go for cause, he swore revenge. He told me he would burn it all down. I never thought he meant it literally. I never thought he would hurt an innocent security guard. It just shows you can't save everyone. Some people are just broken." I watched him. I watched the performance of a lifetime. He was turning his bankruptcy into a martyrdom. He was turning his crime into my son's coffin. He was already spinning the narrative for the insurance adjusters. The fire would pay off the debt. The sympathy would save the IPO. And Marcus would go to prison for 20 years. It was a brilliant plan. It had only one flaw. Preston Sterling thought he owned the factory. He thought he owned the walls, the roof, and the floor. But he forgot who he paid rent to. He forgot that the landlord always keeps a set of keys. And he forgot that Oak Haven Properties took security very seriously. I sat there in the police station watching the screen, my face impassive. A detective walked out. It was Miller, the one who had laughed at my broken windows. He saw me and smirked. "Here to turn yourself in too, Pops?" Miller asked. "Or just here to watch your son rot?" "I am here to give a statement," I said. "We don't need your statement." Miller laughed. "We have the gas cans. We have the accelerant found in his truck. We have the motive. Your son is cooked." I reached into my pocket. I pulled out a small black flash drive. "You have gas cans," I said. "I have a movie." Miller looked at the drive. "What is that?" 10 years ago, I said, my voice calm and level. Oak Haven Properties installed a closed-circuit camera system in the rafters of the main warehouse. We did it to monitor structural integrity and potential leaks. It runs on a separate power grid. It uploads directly to a cloud server. Preston Sterling never knew it was there because he never looked up. He was too busy looking down on everyone else. Miller stopped smiling. "I watched the footage this morning," I continued, "before you kicked my door in. It is very high definition. You can see the faces clearly." I stood up and walked toward him, holding out the drive. "You will see 2 men entering the south loading dock at 2 a.m., I said. "One of them is a known associate of the local organized crime syndicate. The other one is the man crying on television right now." Miller hesitated. He looked at the drive, then at me. "You will see Preston Sterling handing the first man a thick envelope," I said. "You will see him pointing out the structural pillars. You will see him pouring the gasoline himself because he is a control freak who wanted to make sure it was done right. And you will see him leaving through the side door 5 minutes before the explosion." I pressed the drive into Miller's chest. "Marcus wasn't there," I said. "Marcus was asleep in my house. The gas cans in his truck were planted while you were busy breaking down my door." Miller looked at the drive in his hand. He looked pale. He realized that the narrative he had been sold, the easy collar, the slam dunk case, was actually a radioactive bomb that was about to blow up his career if he mishandled it. "If I were you, detective," I said, leaning in close, "I would go arrest the man on the TV before he gets on his private jet, because once the insurance company sees this video, they are going to want a word with him, and they are much less polite than I am." Miller turned and ran toward the captain's office. I sat back down. I watched the television. Preston was still talking, still crying, still weaving his web of lies. He looked so confident. He looked so safe. He didn't know that the fire he started was burning him alive. He didn't know that the ash falling on his shoulders was the remains of his life. I waited. I waited for the phone call that would clear my son. I waited for the look on Preston's face when the handcuffs clicked. I had waited 40 years to see justice. I could wait another hour. The station buzzed with activity. I saw officers running. I saw the captain shouting into a phone. The tide was turning, the water was receding, and the monsters were being exposed on the sand. I closed my eyes and listened to the hum of the station. I thought about Leo. I hoped he was brave. I hoped he knew that his grandfather was coming for him. I wasn't just a landlord. I wasn't just a retiree. I was the firewall. And Preston Sterling had just tried to burn through the wrong barrier. The boardroom of Sterling Manufacturing was a glass cage suspended above the factory floor, a place designed to look down on the people who actually did the work. On this Monday morning, the air inside was recycled and stale-smelling of cold coffee and panic. 12 men and women sat around the oval table, their faces pale, their tablets glowing with red ink. They were the board of directors, the captains of industry who had steered this ship into an iceberg, and now they were waiting for the captain to tell them how to survive the freezing water. Preston Sterling stood at the head of the table. He looked like a man who hadn't slept in 3 days because he hadn't. His eyes were bloodshot, his skin gray, and his hands trembled slightly as he gripped the podium. He was trying to project strength, but he smelled like fear. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice raspy, "the fire was a tragedy. A criminal act perpetrated by a disgruntled former employee, but we will survive this. We have insurance, we have resilience. However, to access the restructuring funds and protect our remaining assets, I am recommending we file for Chapter 11. Bankruptcy protection immediately." A murmur went around the table. Bankruptcy. It was the white flag. It was the end of the IPO dream. It was the admission of total failure. But Preston continued, his voice gaining a desperate manic energy. "This is a strategic move. It pauses our debts. It stops the creditors from seizing our assets. It gives us time to rebuild. We will emerge stronger. We just need to hold the line. He was lying. He wasn't filing for bankruptcy to save the company. He was filing to save himself, to bury the evidence of his fraud in a mountain of legal paperwork and walk away with his golden parachute intact. He thought he had outsmarted everyone. He thought the fire had destroyed the records and the bankruptcy would freeze his enemies. He was wrong. I stood outside the double doors of the boardroom adjusting my cuffs. I was wearing the charcoal suit again, the one that Charles Whitmore had recognized. Marcus stood beside me. He had been released from jail 4 hours ago after Miller had viewed the footage. He hadn't gone home to sleep. He had come here. He wanted to see this. He needed to see this. "Ready, son?" I asked. Marcus nodded. He looked tired, but his eyes were clear. He wasn't the scared young man who had been fired in this building a week ago. He was the heir to a kingdom he had just helped conquer. "Ready, Dad." I pushed the doors open. They swung inward with a heavy swoosh of displaced air. The sound of Preston's voice died in his throat. Every head in the room turned. They saw 2 black men standing in the doorway, one old, one young, both dressed for a funeral. Preston stared at us. For a second, he looked like he was seeing ghosts. Then his face twisted into a snarl. "Security," he shouted, pointing a shaking finger. "Get them out of here." "How did they get past the lobby? Call the police." I walked into the room. I didn't rush. I walked with the heavy, deliberate steps of a man who owns the floorboards beneath his feet. Marcus walked beside me, matching my stride. "We didn't come past the lobby, Preston," I said, my voice filling the silent room. "We came up the freight elevator. The one you haven't serviced in 5 years. I stopped at the opposite end of the long table. I looked at the board members. I saw confusion in their eyes, but also curiosity. They were sharks, and they smelled fresh blood. "Mr. Sterling," one of the directors said, a woman with sharp glasses and a sharper suit. "Who is this?" Preston was coming around the table, his face purple. "He is a trespasser. He is the father of the arsonist who burned down our warehouse. He is nobody." I pulled a chair out. The sound of the legs scraping against the floor was loud and harsh. I sat down. "I am not nobody," I said calmly, "and I am certainly not a trespasser." I placed a thick leather binder on the table. "My name is Isaiah Jefferson," I said, "and I am the chairman of Jefferson Holdings." The woman with the glasses frowned. "Jefferson Holdings, the entity that holds the note on our commercial loans." "That is correct," I said, and I added, looking at Preston, "I am also the owner of Onyx Ventures." Preston froze mid-step. He looked like he had been shot in the chest. "Onyx," he whispered. "No, that's Jonathan Thorne." "Jonathan works for me," I said. "He is a very good actor, but the money, the $10 million you borrowed last week, that came from me." I opened the binder. "And Oak Haven Properties. The landlord who just evicted you from this land, that is me too." The room erupted. Directors were standing up, shouting questions, looking at papers. Preston stood alone in the chaos, his world collapsing in real time. He looked at me, his eyes wide, his mouth hanging open. He couldn't process it. The man he had insulted, the man he had called dirt, the man he had dismissed as a failure, was the architect of his entire reality. You own everything," Preston stammered. "I own the debt," I said, ticking off the items on my fingers. "I own the bridge loan. I own the land. And as of this morning, when you defaulted on the covenant by failing to disclose the eviction notice, I exercised my right to convert that debt into equity." I looked around the table at the stunned faces of the board. "I own 51% of this company." I turned back to Preston. "Sit down, Preston. You are making the place look untidy." Preston didn't sit. He grabbed the edge of the table, his knuckles white. Why, he choked out his voice, a broken whisper. "Why go to all this trouble? Why buy a dying company? Why give me money just to take it away? You could have just sued me. You could have just—" He looked at Marcus, who was watching him with a cold, impassive gaze. "Why?" Preston screamed, tears of frustration and rage spilling over. I stood up slowly. I leaned over the table. I wanted him to hear this. I wanted him to feel it in his marrow. "Because you said something to my son," I said, my voice low and dangerous. "You stood in your driveway and you told him his bloodline wasn't worthy. You told him failure was in his DNA. You threw my grandson into the snow like garbage because you thought we were beneath you." I walked around the table, closing the distance between us. Preston shrank back, hitting the wall. "You thought worth was about the color of your skin or the school you went to or the club you joined. You thought you were a king because you inherited a crown. I stopped inches from him. I could smell his sweat. I could see the veins pulsing in his forehead. I bought this company, Preston, to teach you a lesson in economics. I pointed at Marcus. That man is my son. His blood is my blood. And that blood built this city. That blood survived things you can't even imagine. That blood knows how to work, how to save, how to build, and how to wait. I leaned in closer, my voice dropping to a whisper that echoed like thunder. You said his blood wasn't worthy. I bought this company to prove that his blood owns you. Preston sobbed. It was a pathetic sound. He slid down the wall, collapsing onto the floor. He looked up at me, a broken man in a ruined suit. You can't do this, he wept. This is my life. Not anymore, I said. I turned to the board. They were silent, watching the transfer of power with wide eyes. This meeting is called to order, I announced. The first item on the agenda is a motion to remove Preston Sterling as CEO, effective immediately for cause. For cause? The woman with the glasses asked. What cause fraud? I said. Embezzlement. Arson. Preston's head snapped up. Arson. You can't prove that it was him. He pointed a shaking finger at Marcus. I looked at Marcus. He smiled. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the flash drive I had retrieved from the warehouse camera. He slid it across the table to the woman with the glasses. We can prove it, Marcus said. And so can the police who are waiting in the lobby. Preston scrambled to his feet. Police. I didn't answer him. I looked at the board. Do I have a second on the motion? Second, the woman said without hesitation, plugging the drive into her laptop. All in favor? I asked. Every hand in the room went up. Motion carried, I said. I looked at Preston. You are fired, I said. Get out of my building. Preston looked around the room. He looked for an ally, a friend, a sympathetic face. He found none. He had treated these people with the same arrogance he had treated me, and now they were happy to watch him bleed. He stumbled toward the door. He looked back one last time at the empire he had lost. Then he looked at Marcus. I made you, he whispered. I gave you a chance. Marcus shook his head. No, Preston. You gave me a job. My father gave me a future. Preston turned and ran. He ran out of the boardroom. He ran down the hall. He ran toward a freedom that didn't exist anymore. I sat down in the CEO's chair. It was leather soft and comfortable. I spun it around to face the window, looking down at the factory floor below. I saw the workers, the machines, the lifeblood of the business. Dad, Marcus said, standing beside me. You did it. We did it, son, I corrected him. I looked at the board members who were watching me with a mix of fear and respect. Now I said, let's get to work. We have a mess to clean up, and I want to see the books. The real books. The payoff was complete. The king was dead, and the outcasts had taken the throne. But the final act was yet to come. Preston wasn't just fired. He was a criminal, and justice was waiting for him downstairs in the form of Detective Miller and a pair of handcuffs. The board meeting was over. The sentencing was about to begin. Preston Sterling scrambled toward the double doors, his breath coming in ragged gasps, like a man drowning in his own panic. He reached for the handle, desperate to escape the room where his empire had just crumbled into dust. He thought that if he could just get to the elevator, if he could just get to his car, he could outrun the truth. But the truth moves faster than a 60-year-old man in Italian loafers. Just as his fingers touched the brass handle, the doors swung open from the outside. They didn't open for him. They opened for the law. Detective Miller stood in the doorway, filling the frame with his badge glinting under the harsh fluorescent lights. Behind him were two uniformed officers, their faces grim and unamused. Preston skidded to a halt, his shoes squeaking on the polished floor. He looked at the police, then back at me, terror distorting his face into a mask of pure desperation. Going somewhere, Mr. Sterling Miller asked, his voice dripping with the satisfaction of a man who finally knows he is on the right side of history. I was just leaving. Preston stammered, stepping back. This is a corporate matter, a hostile takeover. You have no jurisdiction here. I stood up from the head of the table. The leather chair creaked, a sound that echoed in the silent boardroom. It stopped being a corporate matter when you lit a match, Preston, I said. I nodded to the woman with the glasses who was still holding the flash drive Marcus had given her. Play it, I commanded. She plugged the drive into the presentation console. The massive screen behind me, usually reserved for charts showing profits and growth, flickered to life. The room dimmed automatically. The board members turned in their chairs, their eyes glued to the display. The video was grainy, but the resolution was sharp enough to ruin a life. It showed the south loading dock of the warehouse bathed in the eerie green glow of night vision. The timestamp in the corner read 2:14 a.m. The room gasped. There on the screen was a black sedan. A figure stepped out. He wasn't wearing a mask. He wasn't trying to hide. He was arrogant enough to think he owned the darkness too. It was Preston Sterling. He walked to the trunk of the car. He pulled out 2 red jerry cans. He handed a thick white envelope to a man standing in the shadows, a man known to half the cops in Chicago as a fixer for the mob. We watched in silence as Preston, the man who claimed to love this company, splashed gasoline over the wooden pallets stacked against the main support beams. We watched him strike a flare. We watched him throw it. The screen flared white as the fire took hold, then cut to black. The lights in the boardroom came back up. The silence was absolute. It was the silence of a tomb. The board members looked at Preston with expressions of horror and revulsion. They weren't just looking at a criminal. They were looking at a man who had betrayed everything they stood for. Preston stood near the door, shaking uncontrollably. He looked at the screen, then at the board, then at me. His reality had shattered. There was no spin that could fix this. There was no lie big enough to cover the arson of his own kingdom. "It's a fake," he screamed, his voice cracking. "It's a deep fake. They altered it." "That's not me." Detective Miller stepped into the room, handcuffs dangling from his belt. "We checked the metadata," Preston Miller said. "It is genuine. And we found traces of the same accelerant on the shoes you were wearing that night. We found them in your garage this morning while you were putting on your tuxedo." Preston backed away until his back hit the wall. He looked like a trapped animal. His eyes darted around the room, looking for an exit, looking for a weapon, looking for anyone to blame but himself. His gaze landed on me. "You," he hissed. "You did this. You ruined everything." "I didn't do anything, Preston," I said calmly. "I just turned on the lights." Something inside him snapped. The facade of the gentleman, the veneer of civilization, peeled away, leaving only raw, violent rage. He let out a guttural roar and lunged. He didn't run for the door. He ran for me. "I will kill you," he screamed, his hands reaching for my throat. "You dirty old—" He never reached me. He didn't even get close. Marcus stepped in front of me. He didn't punch him. He didn't strike him. He simply extended his arm and shoved Preston in the chest. It was an effortless motion, the kind of shove you give to a drunk who is invading your space. Preston flew backward. He tripped over his own feet and crashed into the side of the mahogany table, sending a pitcher of water shattering to the floor. He landed hard on his hip, a cry of pain escaping his lips. Before he could rise, the 2 uniformed officers were on him. They pinned him to the carpet, pressing his face into the wet shards of glass and water. "Get off me!" Preston shrieked, thrashing like a child. "Do you know who I am? I am Preston Sterling." "You are a prisoner," Miller said, snapping the cuffs onto his wrists, "and you have the right to remain silent. I suggest you use it." They hauled him to his feet. His tuxedo was wet, his hair was in his eyes, and there was a cut on his cheek bleeding sluggishly. He looked wild. He looked insane. He looked at Marcus, who was standing over him with a look of pity, not hate. And then Preston's eyes cleared for a second. He realized how I had gotten the information. He realized how I knew about the accounts, the passwords, the hidden leverage. "Victoria," he whispered. He looked at me, his eyes burning with a new intensity. "She told you, didn't she? That ungrateful little traitor." "I gave her everything. I gave her a life of luxury, and she sold me out to you." He laughed, a manic, broken sound. "She is just like her mother," he spat. "Weak, pathetic. She betrayed her own blood. She didn't betray her blood." "Preston," I said, stepping closer to him so he could hear me over the chaos. "She saved it. She chose the family that treats her like a human being, not a bargaining chip. She chose the husband you tried to destroy." "Get him out of here," I told Miller. The officers dragged him toward the door. Preston kicked and screamed, cursing Victoria, cursing me, cursing the world that had finally stopped bending to his will. His voice faded down the hallway, a ghost of entitlement being exorcised from the building. When the doors closed, the boardroom was quiet again. The only sound was the hum of the ventilation system. I turned to the board members. They were still in shock, sitting in their expensive chairs, looking at the empty space where their CEO had just been arrested. "The stock is going to crash," I said, my voice cutting through their paralysis. The woman with the glasses looked at her phone. Her face was pale. "It already has, Mr. Jefferson," she whispered. "The news of the arrest just hit the wire. We are down 40% in pre-market trading. The banks are issuing margin calls. We are insolvent. She looked at me. The company is dead, she said. I walked to the window and looked out at the city. It was a harsh, brutal place, but it was also a place of rebirth. The company is not dead, I said, turning back to them. The name is dead, the brand is dead, but the machines are still there, the workers are still there, the contracts are still there. I placed my hands on the table. I am making a tender offer, I said. They looked at me confused. I am offering to buy all outstanding shares at the current market price, I said, plus 10%, cash, today. They looked at each other. It was a lifeline. It was a way out. If they didn't sell, the bankruptcy courts would pick the carcass clean and they would get nothing. If they sold to me, they could walk away with something. But why, one of the men asked, why would you buy a burning building? Because I know how to put out fires, I said, and because my son needs a job. I looked at Marcus. He smiled. I bought them out. It took less than an hour. The lawyers drafted the emergency agreements. The signatures were digital. The transfers were instant. By noon, Jefferson Holdings owned 100% of Sterling Manufacturing. I didn't buy it for the profit. I bought it for the cleansing. When the papers were signed, the board members left one by one, shaking my hand with a mixture of relief and fear. They fled the building like rats leaving a sinking ship. I was left alone in the boardroom with Marcus. The screen behind us was dark. The table was littered with empty water bottles and abandoned notepads. It is over, Dad, Marcus said, sitting down in the chair Preston had occupied just an hour ago. I walked over to him. I put a hand on his shoulder. Not yet, son, I said. I picked up the phone on the conference table. I dialed a number. Detective Miller. I asked when he answered. Yeah. Isaiah Miller's voice sounded tired but respectful. Is my son cleared? Yeah, Miller said. The DA watched the video. He dropped all charges against Marcus 5 minutes ago. The arrest record is being expunged. You can pick up the boy from Child Protective Services whenever you want. Thank you, Detective. I hung up. I looked at Marcus. Tears were streaming down his face again, but these were different. These were tears of release. The nightmare was over. He wasn't an arsonist. He wasn't a kidnapper. He was a father again. Go get him. Marcus, I said, go get Leo. Marcus stood up. He hugged me hard, burying his face in my shoulder. He shook with emotion. Thank you, Dad, he whispered. Thank you for saving us. I held him tight. Didn't say anything. I didn't need to. He knew. He pulled away, wiping his eyes. What are you going to do? He asked. I looked around the office. I looked at the portrait of Preston Sterling hanging on the wall, a painting of a man who thought he was a god. I walked over to it. I took it down. I set it on the floor facing the wall. I am going to redecorate, I said. Marcus laughed. It was a sound of pure joy. Go on, I said, pushing him toward the door. Your son is waiting. Marcus ran. He ran to get his boy. He ran to start his life. I stood alone in the office of the man who had tried to destroy me. I walked to the window. I looked down at the parking lot. I saw the police cars leaving. I saw the news vans arriving. I took out my phone. I had one more call to make. I had to call Victoria. She was still sitting on my couch wrapped in my old shirt, waiting to hear if she was an orphan or a widow or free. I dialed the number. Victoria, I said when she answered. Isaiah, she whispered. Is it done? It is done, I said. He is gone, and Marcus is coming to get Leo. I heard her sob on the other end. What happens now? She asked. Now, I said, looking at the factory floor below where the workers were starting their shift, unaware that the world had changed. Now we build something worthy. I hung up. I sat in the chair. I closed my eyes. I was tired. I was 75 years old, and I had just fought a war. But as I sat there listening to the hum of the building I now owned, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. I felt peace. The dirt was mine. The bricks were mine. And the bloodline. The bloodline was stronger than ever. The week following the arrest of Preston Sterling was a time of strange and heavy silence inside the factory. It was the silence of people waiting for the axe to fall. The workers on the floor, the foremen in the break rooms, the secretaries in the front office, they all walked with their heads down. They knew the company had been bought. They knew the old king was gone. And in the world they were used to, when a new king conquers the castle, the first thing he does is execute the servants of the old regime. I sat in the corner of the executive suite watching my son. Marcus was standing by the window looking out over the sprawling complex that was now legally his. He was wearing the bespoke suit I had given him, but he had taken off the jacket and rolled up his sleeves. He looked like a man ready to work, not a man ready to rule. "Dad," he said, turning to me, "they are terrified. The shift supervisors are already packing their boxes. They think I am going to fire everyone who was loyal to Preston." I looked at him. "And are you?" Marcus shook his head. "Preston bought their loyalty with fear. I don't want fear. I want respect. But the books, Dad, the books are a disaster. Preston was skimming so much off the top that he hasn't given the floor workers a raise in 6 years. They are working for scraps." He walked to the desk, the massive oak desk that Preston had used to intimidate his enemies. Marcus didn't sit behind it. He sat on the edge of it, his feet planted firmly on the floor. "I know what I have to do," he said. "Then do it," I said. An hour later, Marcus called an all-hands meeting on the factory floor. He didn't stand on a podium. He stood on a shipping pallet surrounded by 300 men and women in grease-stained coveralls. I stood in the back in the shadows, watching. They looked at him with suspicion. They remembered him as the operations manager who had been fired. They remembered the rumors. They expected him to announce layoffs. They expected him to tell them the company was closing. "My name is Marcus Jefferson," my son said, his voice echoing off the steel beams. "And as of yesterday, I am the new CEO of Sterling Manufacturing." The crowd shifted uneasily. "I know what you are thinking," Marcus continued. "You are thinking that new management means cuts. You are thinking that because of the fire and the bankruptcy, we are going to trim the fat. You are thinking that you are the fat." He paused, looking around the room, making eye contact with the men he had worked beside for 5 years. "Preston Sterling built this company on the idea that labor is a cost to be minimized," he said loud and clear. "He thought profits came from squeezing the people who actually make the product." Marcus shook his head. "I don't believe that. My father taught me that you don't build a house on a weak foundation. You are the foundation." He held up a piece of paper. "Effective immediately, we are implementing a 20% wage increase for all hourly employees. We are reinstating the overtime pay that was cut last year, and we are starting a profit-sharing program. If this company eats, you eat." The silence that followed was absolute. It was the shock of people who had been kicked for so long they had forgotten what it felt like to be offered a hand. Then one man started clapping, then another. Then the whole room erupted. It wasn't polite applause, it was a roar. It was the sound of loyalty shifting. Marcus hadn't just bought their labor, he had earned their backs. He stepped down from the pallet and shook hands not as a boss, but as a partner. I watched from the shadows, my chest tight with pride. Preston had tried to build a legacy with his name. Marcus was building a legacy with his actions. But while the factory was finding its new rhythm, the situation at home was still a jagged wound that refused to close. Victoria was still sleeping on my couch. She had been there for a week. She cooked, she cleaned, she kept her head down. She was like a ghost haunting the edges of our lives, trying to be invisible, trying to be useful, trying to atone. Every evening when Marcus came home from the factory, he would walk past her with a polite nod and go straight to Leo's room. He treated her like a roommate he didn't know very well. He was civil, but cold. The ice between them was thick, and I could see it cracking Victoria's spirit a little more each day. On Friday night, the tension finally broke. I was in the kitchen making tea. Marcus was sitting at the table going over production schedules. Victoria walked in. She was wearing jeans and one of my old sweaters. She looked stripped down raw. She didn't have her jewelry or her makeup. She looked like the woman she was underneath the sterling varnish. "Marcus," she said, her voice trembling. Marcus didn't look up. "I am busy, Victoria. We need to talk," she said. I can't live like this. I can't be a ghost in your house." "Then leave," Marcus said, turning a page. "Nobody is keeping you here. You helped us. We appreciate it. You are free to go." "Go where?" she asked, tears welling up. "My father is in jail. My mother won't speak to me because she blames me for his arrest. I have no money. I have no home. And I miss my husband. I miss my son." Marcus slammed the folder shut. "You miss your husband?" he asked, standing up, his chair scraping violently against the floor. You stood in a court of law and told a judge I was abusive. You tried to take my son away from me. You chose your father over me, Victoria. You made your choice." "I was scared," she cried. "You know what he is like. He threatened to cut me off, so you cut me off instead." Marcus shouted. "You let him throw us into the street. You let him call our son a mongrel, and you said nothing." "I know," she sobbed, falling to her knees. "I was weak. I was a coward. I know that. But I came back. I stole the files. I helped you take him down. Doesn't that count for anything?" "It counts," Marcus said, his voice hard. "That is why you are sleeping on a couch instead of in a cell next to your father. That is your reward. But don't ask me for love. You spent that currency a long time ago." He turned his back on her. He walked to the window, staring out at the dark street. Victoria stayed on the floor, weeping softly. It was a pathetic sight. A woman who had been raised in a castle begging for scraps in a bungalow. I walked over to Marcus. I stood beside him, looking at his reflection in the glass. He looked angry, but under the anger I saw the pain. He still loved her. That was the problem. If he didn't love her, he wouldn't be this angry. He would just be indifferent. "Dad," he whispered, "what do I do?" I looked at him. I looked at Victoria. "It is not my place to tell you what to do with your wife's son," I said quietly. "But I will tell you this." I turned him so he had to look at me. "Power is in your hands now, Marcus. You have the money, you have the company, you have the boy, you hold all the cards. Whether you forgive her or not, that is up to you. But when you make that decision, remember one thing." I pointed at Victoria, who was still crying on the floor. "Remember when you fell off the horse," I said. "Remember who kicked you when you were down." She did. "She kicked you hard." Marcus nodded, his jaw tightening. "But also remember," I continued, "who helped you up when the wolf was at the door. She opened the gate, Marcus. She gave us the weapon. Without her, Preston would still be in that office, and we would still be in court." I put my hand on his shoulder. "Mercy isn't about forgetting the kick, Marcus. It is about understanding the fear that caused it. She was a victim of Preston Sterling just as much as you were. The difference is you had a father who caught you. She had a father who sold her. I left him there. I walked out of the kitchen, leaving them alone. This was a fire they had to walk through themselves. I went to my room and sat on the edge of the bed, listening to the murmur of voices. They talked for hours. There was shouting, there was crying, and then there was silence. The next morning I drove Marcus to the factory. He was quiet. He looked exhausted, but his face was set. "Is she staying?" I asked. Marcus looked out the window. "She wants to come back," he said. "She wants to be my wife again. She wants to be Leo's mother. And I told her yes," Marcus said. I nodded. I didn't say anything. I trusted him. But Marcus added, turning to me, a hard glint in his eye. "I told her things are different now. I told her she is not Mrs. Sterling anymore. She is not the princess of the manor. If she wants to be part of this family, she has to understand what this family is about." "And what is that?" I asked, smiling. "Work," he said. We pulled up to the factory. We walked into the lobby. The receptionist smiled at Marcus. The security guard nodded respectfully. We took the elevator up to the executive floor, but when the doors opened, Marcus didn't turn left toward the CEO's office. He turned right toward the administrative bullpen. He stopped at a small cubicle in the corner. It was empty. It had a basic computer, a phone, and a stack of unfiled invoices. It was the desk of an entry-level clerk. A moment later, the elevator dinged again. Victoria stepped out. She was wearing a simple skirt and a blouse she had bought at a thrift store with the cash I had given her for groceries. She looked nervous. She held a packed lunch in a brown paper bag. She walked over to us. She looked at Marcus, then at me. Marcus pointed to the cubicle. "This is your desk," he said. Victoria looked at the small gray space. It was a far cry from the corner office she had grown up visiting. It was the bottom of the ladder. "Your title is Junior Administrative Assistant," Marcus said, his voice professional and cool. "You answer the phones, you file the invoices, you make the coffee for the shift supervisors. Your pay is $12 an hour." He looked at her, waiting for the entitlement to flare up, waiting for the Sterling pride to reject the insult. "You wanted to help build something," Marcus asked. "This is the ground floor. If you want to be my partner, you have to know how the machine works. You have to earn the respect of the people your father stepped on. Nobody is going to do it for you. And if you are late or if you complain, you are fired, just like anyone else." Victoria looked at the desk. She ran her hand over the cheap laminate. She looked at the stack of invoices that represented hours of tedious, mind-numbing work. Then she looked at Marcus. Her eyes were clear. There was no anger. There was only gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered. She put her lunch bag in the drawer. She sat down in the cheap swivel chair. She picked up the phone. Jefferson Manufacturing," she said into the receiver, her voice steady. "How can I help you?" Marcus watched her for a moment. He didn't smile. He didn't soften. But he nodded. It was a start. It was a penance. And it was a path. He turned to me. "I have a meeting with the union reps," he said. "Go," I said. I watched him walk away toward his office. Then I looked at Victoria typing data into a spreadsheet, her back straight, her focus absolute. She was learning the lesson I had taught Marcus years ago. You don't inherit worth. You build it. I walked to the elevator. My work here was done. The company was in good hands. The family was broken, but it was resetting. The bones were knitting back together stronger than before. I went down to the parking lot and got into my old truck. I had a stop to make. I had to go to the bank. Not to withdraw money, but to set up a new trust fund. For Leo. And maybe, just maybe, for the second child that Marcus and Victoria might have one day now that they were learning how to be real people. I drove away from the factory, leaving the empire behind. I didn't need it. I never did. I just needed to know that my son was strong enough to hold it. And as I merged onto the highway heading back to the south side, back to my bungalow and my garden, I knew that the bloodline was just fine. It had been tested by fire, and it had come out gold. The winter in Chicago breaks not with a whisper, but with a promise. It starts when the ice on the lake cracks, revealing the dark, restless water beneath, and the wind shifts from a knife to a caress. 3 months ago, I sat on a metal bench in Lincoln Park watching my breath freeze in the air while my son's life fell apart. The trees were bare skeletons scratching at a gray sky, and the ground was hard as iron. We were refugees in our own city, huddled around a broken suitcase, shivering against the cold indifference of the world. Today the park is alive. The grass is a vibrant, defiant green, the kind that pushes through the mud after a long thaw. The trees are heavy with buds ready to explode into leaf. The sun is warm on my face, not the mocking, cold light of winter, but a genuine heat that seeps into your bones and loosens the knots of age. I sit on the same bench. It is just metal and wood, but it feels different now. It feels like a throne. Beside me, Marcus stretches his legs out. He is not wearing a coat that is too thin for the weather. He is wearing a light, casual jacket, the kind a man wears when he has nothing to prove and nowhere he has to rush to be. He looks younger. The lines of stress that had carved themselves around his eyes during the winter have softened. He looks like a man who has slept through the night. In front of us, Leo is running. He is chasing a kite, a bright red diamond dancing against the blue sky. He is laughing. It is the sound of pure, unadulterated joy. He isn't worried about where he will sleep tonight. He isn't worried about his parents fighting. He knows his world is solid. He knows the ground beneath his feet belongs to us. It is strange, Marcus said, watching the kite dip and soar, to think that just 90 days ago I was sitting right here thinking my life was over. I thought I was nothing. I nodded. You were never nothing, son. You were just forgotten. Marcus turned to look at me. His eyes were serious, searching. He had been running the company for 2 months now. He had faced down union reps, navigated supply chain crises, and reorganized the entire management structure. He had grown into the suit. But there was still one question that haunted him, one shadow in the corner of his mind. "Dad," he said quietly, "can I ask you something? Anything. Why did you wait?" I looked at him. I knew what he meant. "Why did you let me struggle?" Marcus continued, his voice not angry but filled with a deep curiosity. "Why did you let me take out student loans? Why did you let me work double shifts at the warehouse to pay for my first car? Why did you let me marry into a family that treated me like dirt while you were sitting on an empire? You could have stopped it. You could have given me the money 10 years ago. I wouldn't have had to suffer." I watched Leo trip over a root, tumble onto the grass, and immediately scramble back up laughing. "Look at your son Marcus," I said. "What happens if you carry him everywhere?" "He never learns to walk," Marcus replied. "Exactly," I said. I leaned back against the bench, looking up at the city skyline, the buildings I had helped shape from the shadows. If I had given you the money when you were 20, I said, if I had handed you the keys to the kingdom before you knew how to build a castle, you would have become him. Him! Preston Sterling, I said. Marcus frowned. I would never be like him. You might have been, I said gently. Preston was born on third base and thought he hit a triple. He never knew the value of $1 because he never had to sweat for one. He thought dignity was something you bought. He thought respect was something you inherited. He was weak, Marcus. His arrogance was just a shell protecting a soft, terrified man. When the wind blew, he shattered. I turned to face my son. I wanted you to be strong. I wanted you to know what it feels like to be hungry so you would never look down on a man who is starving. I wanted you to know what it feels like to work with your hands so you would never disrespect the people who work for you. I wanted you to build your own character because character is the one thing I cannot give you. I pointed to his chest. The fire you have in there. The fire that made you stand up to Preston. The fire that made you fight for your son. That didn't come from my bank account. Marcus, that came from your struggle. That came from the nights you worried about rent. That came from the times you were knocked down and had to get back up on your own. I paused, letting the words sink in. I built an empire of dirt and bricks, I said, but you built a man, and that is a far greater legacy. Marcus looked down at his hands. He flexed his fingers, calloused from years of hard work. He understood. He finally understood that the inheritance wasn't the money. The inheritance was the resilience. You were right, he whispered. I wouldn't be this man if you had made it easy. And I am proud of this man, I said, putting a hand on his shoulder. We sat in silence for a moment, just watching the kite fly, watching the future dance on the wind. Then I saw him. A movement on the path caught my eye. A figure walking alone, separate from the families and the joggers. He was walking slowly, his head down his shoulders, hunched. He was wearing a tracksuit that looked too big for him and a baseball cap pulled low over his eyes. It was Preston Sterling. He was out on bail awaiting sentencing. The lawyer said he was looking at 10 to 15 years. His assets were frozen, his reputation was incinerated, and his friends had evaporated like mist. He was a ghost haunting the city he used to think he owned. He walked closer. He didn't see us at first. He was staring at the ground, watching his own feet shuffle along the pavement. He looked old, not the dignified old of a statesman, but the withered old of a man whose soul has been eaten by regret. Then he looked up. He stopped. He saw the bench. He saw the red kite. And then he saw us. I saw the recognition hit him. I saw his eyes widen. For a second, I thought he might say something. I thought he might scream or beg or spit. I saw his mouth open slightly. But then he looked at Marcus. He saw the way my son sat relaxed, confident, powerful. He saw the peace in his face. And then he looked at me. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. I just looked at him. I looked at him with the calm, absolute certainty of a man who knows exactly who he is. Preston's mouth closed. He swallowed hard. His gaze dropped to the pavement. He pulled his cap lower, hiding his face, hiding his shame. He turned away, stepping off the path to walk on the grass, giving us a wide berth. He walked away, disappearing into the trees, a man walking toward a cage he had built for himself. He didn't say a word. He didn't have to. His silence was his surrender. Marcus watched him go. He didn't look angry. He just looked sad. He has nothing left, Marcus said softly. He has what he earned. I said. Leo came running back to the bench, breathless and happy, his cheeks flushed with the spring air. Grandpa. Did you see? Did you see how high it went? I saw Leo, I said, smiling. It went all the way to the clouds. I reached out and picked him up. He was heavy, a solid weight of promise and future. I sat him on my knee. Are we going to come back here tomorrow? Leo asked. We can come back whenever you want, I said. This is your park now. I looked at Marcus, then at the path where Preston had vanished, then back at my grandson. The winter was over, the ice had melted, the debt was paid. Let's go home, I said. We stood up. 3 generations of Jeffersons. We walked toward the car, leaving the bench behind, leaving the past behind. We walked into the spring, ready for whatever came next, because we knew that no matter what the world threw at us, we had the strength to catch it. In this life, people will try to measure your worth by the fabric of your clothes or the color of your skin. They'll talk about bloodlines and pedigrees as if dignity is something you inherit, not something you build. But I learned a long time ago that true power isn't loud. It doesn't need to shout to be heard. It sits quietly in the back of the room waiting for the right moment to speak. My son learned that legacy isn't about what you're given, but what you can hold on to when the world tries to take it all away. Never underestimate the quiet man in the corner. He might just own the building you're standing in. True power does not need to announce itself. In a world obsessed with appearances, titles, and pedigrees, it is easy to mistake noise for strength and silence for weakness. But as I taught my son, worth is not something you inherit. It is something you forge in the fires of adversity. You can strip a man of his job, his home, and his status, but you cannot strip him of his character. Never let anyone define your value by what you drive or where you live. The most dangerous person in the room isn't the one shouting commands. It's the one quietly holding the deed to the building. If this story of justice and resilience inspired you, please hit that like button and subscribe and let me know in the comments, have you ever had to prove your worth to someone who underestimated you?